Chapter 3, Part 4, Book 2 of Confession of a Child of the Century. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jessi. Confession of a Child of the Century by Alfred de MUSSET. Translated by Kendall Warren. Book 2, Part 4, Chapter 3. Our quarrel had been less sad than our reconciliation. It was attended, on Brigitte's part, by a mystery which frightened me at first, and then planted in my soul the seeds of constant dread. There developed in me, in spite of my struggles, the two elements of misfortune which the past had bequeathed me. At times furious jealousy attended by reproaches and insults. At other times a cruel gaiety, an affected cheerfulness that mockingly outraged whatever I held most dear. Thus the inexorable spectres of the past pursued me without respite. Thus Brigitte, seeing herself treated alternately as a faithless mistress and a shameless woman, fell into a condition of melancholy that clouded our entire life. And worst of all, that sadness even, the cause of which I knew, was not the most burdensome of our sorrows. I was young and I loved pleasure. That daily association with a woman older than I, who suffered and languished, that face more and more serious which was always before me, all that repelled my youth and aroused within me bitter regrets for the liberty I had lost. When we were passing through the forest by the beautiful light of the moon, we both experienced a profound melancholy. Brigitte looked at me in pity. We sat down on a rock near a wild gorge. We passed 2 entire hours there. Her half-veiled eyes plunged into my soul athwart the glance from mine, then wandered to nature, to the heavens and the valley. "Ah, my dear child," she said, "how I pity you! You do not love me." In order to reach that rock one must travel 2 leagues. 2 more in returning makes 4. Brigitte was afraid of neither fatigue nor darkness. We set out at 11 at night, expecting to reach home some time in the morning. When we went on long tramps, she always dressed in a blue blouse and the apparel of a man, saying that skirts were not made for bushes. She walked before me in the sand with a firm step, and such a charming melange of feminine delicacy and childlike temerity that I stopped every few moments to look at her. It seemed that, once started, she had to accomplish a difficult but sacred task. She walked in front like a soldier, her arms swinging, her voice ringing through the woods in song. Suddenly she turned, came to me, and kissed me. This was going. On the return she leaned on my arm. Then more songs. There were confidences, tender avowals in low tones, although we were alone, 2 leagues from anywhere. I do not recall a single word spoken on the return that was not of love or friendship. One night we struck out through the woods, leaving the road which led to the rock. Brigitte was tramping along so stoutly, her little velvet cap on her light hair made her look so much like a resolute gamin that I forgot that she was a woman when there were no obstacles in our path. More than once she was obliged to call me to her aid, when I, without thinking of her, had pushed on ahead. I cannot describe the effect produced on me in the clear night air, in the midst of the forest, by that voice of a woman, half joyous and half plaintive, coming from that little schoolboy body wedged in between roots and trunks of trees, unable to advance. I took her in my arms. "Come, madam," I cried, laughing. You are a pretty little mountaineer, but you are blistering your white hands, and in spite of your hobnailed shoes, your stick, and your martial air, I see that you must be carried." We arrived at the rock breathless. About my body was strapped a leather belt to which was attached a wicker bottle. When we were seated on the rock, my dear Brigitte asked for the bottle. I had lost it, as well as a tinder box which served another purpose. That was to read the inscriptions on the guide-posts when we went astray, which occurred frequently. At such times I would climb the posts and read the half-effaced inscription by the light of the tinder box, all that playfully like the children that we were. At a crossroad we would have to examine not one guide-post but 5 or 6 until the right one was found. But this time we had lost our baggage on the way. "Very well," said Brigitte. "We will pass the night here, as I am rather tired. This rock will make a hard bed, but we can cover it with dry leaves. Let us sit down and make the best of it." The night was superb. The moon was rising behind us. I looked at it over my left shoulder. Brigitte was watching the lines of the wooded hills as they began to design themselves against the background of sky. As the light flooded the copse and threw its halo over sleeping nature, Brigitte's song became more gentle and more melancholy. Then she bent over, and throwing her arms around my neck, said, "Do not think that I do not understand your heart, or that I would reproach you for what you make me suffer. It is not your fault, my friend, if you have not the power to forget your past life. You have loved me in good faith, and I shall never regret, although I should die for it, the day I gave myself to you. You thought you were entering upon a new life, and that with me you would forget the women who had deceived you. Alas, Octave, I used to smile at that precocious experience which you said you had been through, and of which I heard you boast like a child who knows nothing of life. I thought I had but to will it, and all that there was that was good in your heart would come to your lips with my first kiss. You too believed it, but we were both mistaken. Oh, my child, you have in your heart a plague that cannot be cured. That woman who deceived you, how you must have loved her! Yes, more than you love me, alas, much more, since with all my poor love I cannot efface her image. She must have deceived you most cruelly, since it is in vain that I am faithful. And the others, those wretches who then poisoned your youth, the pleasures they sold must have been terrible, since you ask me to imitate them. You remember them with me. Alas, my dear child, that is too cruel. I like you better when you are unjust and furious, when you reproach me for imaginary crimes and avenge on me the wrong done you by others, than when you are under the influence of that frightful gaiety, when you assume that air of hideous mockery, when that mask of scorn affronts my eyes. Tell me, Octave, why that? Why those moments when you speak of love with contempt and rail at the most sacred mysteries of love? What frightful power over your irritable nerves has that life you have led, that such insults mount to your lips in spite of you? Yes, in spite of you, for your heart is noble, you blush at your own blasphemy. You love me too much not to suffer when you see me suffer. Ah, I know you now. The first time I saw you thus, I was seized with a feeling of terror of which I can give you no idea. I thought you were only a roue, that you had deliberately deceived me by feigning a love you did not feel, and that I saw you such as you really were. Oh, my friend, I thought it was time to die. What a night I passed! You do not know my life. You do not know that I, who speak to you, have had an experience as terrible as yours. Alas, life is sweet only to those who do not know life. You are not, my dear Octave, the only man I have loved. There is hidden in my heart a fatal story that I wish you to know. My father destined me, when I was quite young, for the only son of an old friend. They were neighbors, and each owned a little domain of almost equal value. The two families saw each other every day, and lived, so to speak, together. My father died. My mother had been dead some time. I lived with an aunt whom you know. A journey she was compelled to take forced her to confide me to the care of my future father-in-law. He called me his daughter, and it was so well known about the country that I was to marry his son that we were allowed the greatest liberty together. That young man, whose name you need not know, appeared to love me. What had been friendship from infancy became love in time. He began to tell me of the happiness that awaited us. He spoke of his impatience. I was only 1 year younger than he. But he had made the acquaintance of a man of dissipated habits who lived in the vicinity, a sort of adventurer, and had listened to his evil suggestions. While I was yielding to his caresses with the confidence of a child, he resolved to deceive his father and to abandon me after having ruined me. His father called us into his room one evening, and in the presence of the family set the day of our wedding. The very evening before that day, he met me in the garden and spoke to me of love with more force than usual. He said that, since the time was set, we were just the same as married, and, for that matter, had been in the eyes of God ever since our birth. I have no other excuse to offer than my youth, my ignorance, and my confidence in him. I gave myself to him before becoming his wife, and 8 days afterward he left his father's house. He fled with a woman with whom his new friend had made him acquainted. He wrote that he had set out for Germany, and that we would never see him again. That is, in a word, the story of my life. My husband knew it as you now know it. I am proud, my child, and I have sworn that no man should ever make me again suffer what I suffered then. I saw you and forgot my oath, but not my sorrow. You must treat me gently. If you are sick, I am also. We must care for each other. You see, Octave, I too know what it is to cherish up memories of the past. It inspires me at times with cruel terror. I should have more courage than you, for perhaps I have suffered more. It is my place to begin. My heart is not sure of itself. I am still very feeble. My life in this village was so tranquil before you came. I had promised myself that it should never change. All that makes me exacting. Ah, well, it does not matter. I am yours. You have told me in your better moments that Providence appointed me to watch over you as a mother. Yes, when you make me suffer, I do not look upon you as a lover, but as a sick child, fretful and rebellious, that I must care for and cure, in order that I may always keep him and love him. May God give me that power, she added, looking up to heaven. May God, who sees me, who hears us, may the God of mothers and of lovers permit me to accomplish that task. When I feel as though I would sink under it, when my pride rebels, when my heart is breaking, when all my life—" She could not finish. Her tears choked her. Oh God! I saw her there on her knees, her hands clasped on the rock. She swayed in the breeze as did the bushes about us. Frail and sublime creature, she prayed for her love. I raised her in my arms. "Oh, my only friend!" I cried. "Oh, my mistress, my mother, and my sister! Pray also for me, that I may be able to love you as you deserve. Pray that I may have the courage to live, that my heart may be cleansed in your tears, that it may become a holy offering before God, and that we may share it together." All was silent about us. Above our heads spread the heavens resplendent with stars. "Do you remember?" I said. "Do you remember the first day?" From that night we never returned to that spot. That rock was an altar which has retained its purity. It is one of the visions of my life which still passes before my eyes, wreathed in spotless white. End of Chapter 3, Part 4, Book 2. Chapter 4, Part 4, Book 2 of Confession of a Child of the Century. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jessi. Confession of a Child of the Century by Alfred de MUSSET. Translated by Kendall Warren. Book 2, Part 4, Chapter 4. As I was crossing the public square one evening, I saw two men standing together. One of them said, "It appears to me that he has ill-treated her." "It is her fault," replied the other. "Why choose such a man? He has known only public women. She is paying the price of her folly." I advanced in the darkness to see who was speaking thus, and to hear more if possible, but they passed on as soon as they spied me. I found Brigitte much disturbed. Her aunt was seriously ill. She had time for only a few words with me. I did not see her for an entire week. I knew that she had summoned a physician from Paris. Finally, she sent for me. "My aunt is dead," she said. "I lose the only one left me on earth. I am now alone in the world, and I am going to leave the country." "Am I, then, nothing to you?" "Yes, my friend. You know that I love you, and I often believe that you love me. But how can I count on you? I am your mistress, alas, but you are not my lover. It is for you that Shakespeare has written these sad words: 'Make thy doublet of changeable taffeta, for thy mind is a very opal.' And I, Octave," she added, pointing to her mourning costume, "I am reduced to a single color, and I shall not change it for a long time. Leave the country if you choose. I will either kill myself or I will follow you. Ah, Brigitte," I continued, throwing myself on my knees before her, "you thought you were alone when your aunt died. That is the most cruel punishment you could inflict on me. Never have I so keenly felt the misery of my love for you. You must retract those terrible words. I deserve them, but they will kill me. Oh God, can it be true that I count for nothing in your life, or that I am an influence in your life only because of the evil I have done you?" "I do not know," she said, "who is busying himself in our affairs. Certain insinuations, mixed with idle gossip, have been set afloat in the village and in the neighboring country. Some say that I have been ruined. Others accuse me of imprudence and folly. Others represent you as a cruel and dangerous man. Someone has spied into our most secret thoughts. Things that I thought no one else knew, events in your life and sad scenes to which they have led, are known to others. My poor aunt spoke to me about it some time since, and she knew it some time before speaking to me. Who knows but what that has hastened her death? When I meet my old friends in the street, they either treat me coldly or turn aside. Even my dear peasant girls, those good girls who love me so much, shrug their shoulders when they see my place empty at the Sunday afternoon balls. How has that come about? I do not know, nor do you, I suppose, but I must go away. I cannot endure it. And my aunt's death, so sudden, so unexpected, above all this solitude, this empty room. Courage fails me. My friend, do not abandon me. She wept. In an adjoining room I saw her household goods in disorder, a trunk on the floor, everything indicating preparations for departure. It was evident that at the time of her aunt's death, Brigitte tried to go away without seeing me, but could not. She was so overwhelmed with emotion that she could hardly speak. Her condition was pitiful, and it was I who had brought her to it. Not only was she unhappy, but she was insulted in public, and the man who ought to be her support and her consolation in such an hour was the cause of all her troubles. I felt the wrong I had done her so keenly that I was overcome with shame. After so many promises, so much useless exaltation, so many plans and hopes, what had I, in fact, accomplished in 3 months? I thought I had a treasure in my heart, and there came out of it nothing but malice, the shadow of a dream, and the misfortune of a woman I adored. For the first time I found myself really face to face with myself. Brigitte reproached me for nothing. She had tried to go away and could not. She was ready to suffer still. I suddenly asked myself if I ought not to leave her, if it was not my duty to flee from her and rid her of the scourge of my presence. I arose and, passing into the next room, sat down on Brigitte's trunk. There I leaned my head on my hand and sat motionless. I looked about me at the confused piles of goods. Alas, I knew them all. My heart was not so hardened that it could not be moved by the memories which they awakened. I began to calculate all the harm I had done. I saw my dear Brigitte walking under the lindens with her goat beside her. "Oh, man," I mused, "and by what right? How dared you come to this house and lay hands on this woman? Who has ordained that she should suffer for you? You array yourself in fine linen and set out, sleek and happy, for the home where your mistress languishes. You throw yourself upon the cushions where she has just knelt in prayer for you and for her, and you gently stroke those delicate hands that still tremble. You think it no evil to inflame a poor heart, and you perorate as warmly in your deliriums of love as the wretched lawyer who comes with red eyes from a suit he has lost. You play the infant prodigy, you make sport of suffering. You find it amusing to occupy your leisure moments, to commit murder by means of little pinpricks. What will you say to the living God when your work is finished? What will become of the woman who loves you? Where will you fall while she leans on you for support? With what face will you one day bury your pale and wretched creature who has just buried the only being who was left to protect her? Yes, yes, you will doubtless have to bury her, for your love kills and consumes. You have devoted her to the Furies, and it is she who appeases them. If you follow that woman, you will be the cause of her death. Take care, her guardian angel hesitates. He has just knocked at the door of this house, in order to frighten away a fatal and shameful passion. He inspired Brigitte with the idea of flight. At this moment he may be whispering in her ear his final warning. Oh, you assassin, you murderer, beware, it is a matter of life and death. Thus I communed with myself. Then on the sofa I caught sight of a little gingham dress, folded and ready to be packed in the trunk. It had been the witness of our happy days. I took it up and examined it. I leave you, I said to it. I lose you. Oh, little dress, would you go away without me? No, I cannot abandon Brigitte. Under the circumstances, it would be cowardly. She has just lost her aunt and is all alone. She is exposed to the power of I know not what enemy. Can it be Mercanson? He may have spoken of my conversation with him, and seeing that I was jealous of D'Alon, may have guessed the rest. Assuredly, he is the snake who has been hissing about my well-beloved flower. I must punish him, and I must repair the wrong I have done Brigitte. Fool that I am! I think of leaving her when I ought to consecrate my life to her, to the expiation of my sins, to rendering her happy after the tears I have drawn from her eyes. When I am her only support in the world, her only friend, her only protection. When I ought to follow her to the end of the world, to shelter her with my body, to console her for having loved me, for having given herself to me. Brigitte, I cried, returning to her room, wait an hour for me and I will return. Where are you going? She asked. Wait for me, I replied. Do not set out without me. Remember the words of Ruth. Whither thou goest, I shall go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. I left her precipitately and rushed out to find Mercanson. I was told that he had gone out, and I entered his house to wait for him. I sat in the corner of the room on a priest's chair before a dirty black table. I was becoming impatient when I recalled my duel on account of my first mistress. I received a wound from a bullet and am still a fool, I said to myself. What have I come to do here? This priest will not fight. If I seek a quarrel with him, he will say that his priestly robes forbid, and he will continue his vile gossip when I have gone. Moreover, for what can I hold him responsible? What is it that has disturbed Brigitte? They say that her reputation has been sullied, that I ill-treat her, and that she ought not to submit to it. What stupidity! That concerns no one. There is nothing to do but allow them to talk. In such a case, to notice an insult is to give it importance. Is it possible to prevent provincials from talking about their neighbors? Can anyone prevent a gossip from maligning a woman who loves? What measures can be taken to stop a public rumor? If they say that I ill-treat her, it is for me to prove the contrary by my conduct with her, and not by violence. It would be as ridiculous to seek a quarrel with Mercanson as to leave the country on account of gossip. No, we must not leave the country. That would be a bad move. That would be to say to all the world that there is truth in its idle rumors, and to give excuse to the gossips. We must neither go away nor take any notice of such things. I returned to Brigitte. A half hour had passed, and I had changed my mind 3 times. I dissuaded her from her plans. I told her what I had just done, and why I had not carried out my first impulse. She listened resignedly, yet she wished to go away. The house where her aunt had died had become odious to her. Much effort and persuasion on my part were required to get her to consent to remain. Finally, I accomplished it. We repeated that we would despise the world, that we would yield nothing, that we would not change our manner of life. I swore that my love should console her for all her sorrows, and she pretended to hope for the best. I told her that this circumstance had so enlightened me in the matter of the wrongs I had done her, that my conduct would prove my repentance, that I would drive from me, as a phantom, all the evil that remained in my heart, that henceforth she would not be offended by either my pride or my caprices. And thus, sad and patient, her arms around my neck, she yielded obedience to the pure caprice that I myself mistook for a flash of reason. End of Chapter 4, Part 4, Book 2. Chapter 5, Part 4, Book 2 of Confession of a Child of the Century. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jessi. Confession of a Child of the Century by Alfred de MUSSET. Translated by Kendall Warren. Book 2, Part 4, Chapter 5. One day I saw a little chamber she called her oratory. There was no furniture except a prie-dieu and a little altar with a cross and some vases of flowers. As for the rest, the walls and curtains were as white as snow. She shut herself up in that room at times, but rarely since I had known her. I stepped to the door and saw Brigitte seated on the floor in the middle of the room, surrounded by the flowers she was throwing here and there. She held in her hand a little wreath that appeared to be made of dried grass, and she was breaking it to pieces. "What are you doing?" I asked. She trembled and stood up. "It is nothing but a child's plaything," she said. "It is a rose wreath that has faded here in the oratory. I have come here to change my flowers, as I have not attended to them for some time." Her voice trembled, and she appeared to be about to faint. I recalled that name of Brigitte la Rose that I had heard given her. I asked her if it was not her crown of roses that she had just broken thus. "No," she replied, turning pale. "Yes," I cried. "Yes, on my life! Give me the pieces." I gathered them up and placed them on the altar. Then I was silent, my eyes fixed on the offering. "Was I not right," she asked, "if it was my crown, to take it from the wall where it has hung so long? What good are these remains? Brigitte la Rose is no more, nor the flowers that baptized her." She went out. I heard her sob, and the door closed on me. I fell on my knees and wept bitterly. When I returned to her room, I found her waiting for me. Dinner was ready. I took my place in silence, and not a word was said of what was on our hearts. End of Chapter 5, Part 4, Book 2. Chapter 6, Part 4, Book 2 of Confession of a Child of the Century. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jessi. Confession of a Child of the Century by Alfred de MUSSET. Translated by Kendall Warren. Book 2, Part 4, Chapter 6. It was Mercanson who had repeated in the village and in the chateaux my conversation with him about D'Alon, and the suspicions that, in spite of myself, I had allowed him clearly to see. Everyone knows how bad news travels in the provinces, flying from mouth to mouth and growing as it flies. That is what happened in this case. Brigitte and I found ourselves face to face with each other in a new position. However feebly she may have tried to flee, she had nevertheless made the attempt. It was on account of my prayers that she remained. There was an obligation implied. I was under oath not to grieve her either by my jealousy or my levity. Every thoughtless or mocking word that escaped me was a sin. Every sorrowful glance from her was a reproach acknowledged and merited. Her simple good nature gave a charm even to solitude. She could see me now at all hours without resorting to any precaution. Perhaps she consented to this arrangement in order to prove to me that she valued her love more highly than her reputation. She seemed to regret having shown that she cared for the representations of malice. At any rate, instead of making any attempt to disarm criticism or thwart curiosity, we lived the freest kind of life, more regardless of public opinion than ever. For some time I kept my word, and not a cloud troubled our life. These were happy days, but it is not of these that I must speak. It was said everywhere about the country that Brigitte was living publicly with a libertine from Paris, that her lover ill-treated her, that they spent their time quarreling, and that all of it would come to a bad end. As they had praised Brigitte for her conduct in the past, so they blamed her now. There was nothing in her past life, even, that was not picked to pieces and misrepresented. Her lonely tramps over the mountains, when engaged in works of charity, suddenly became the subject of quibbles and of raillery. They spoke of her as of a woman who had lost all human respect, and who deserved the frightful misfortunes she was drawing down on her head. I had told Brigitte that it was best to let them talk and pay no attention to them. But the truth is, it became unsupportable to me. I sometimes tried to catch a word that I might consider an insult and demand an explanation. I listened to whispered conversations in a salon where I was a visitor, but could hear nothing. In order to do us better justice, they waited until I had gone. I returned to Brigitte and told her that all these stories were mere nonsense, that it was foolish to notice them, that they could talk about us as much as they pleased, and we would care nothing about it. Was I not terribly mistaken? If Brigitte was imprudent, was it not my place to be cautious and ward off danger? On the contrary, I took, so to speak, the part of the world against her. I began by indifference. I was soon to grow malignant. "It is true," I said, "that they speak evil of your nocturnal excursions. Are you sure that they are wrong? Has nothing happened in those romantic grottos and bypaths in the forest? Have you never accepted the arm of an unknown as you accepted mine? Was it merely charity that served as your divinity in that beautiful temple of virtue that you visited so bravely?" Brigitte's glance when I adopted this tone I shall never forget. I shuddered at it myself. But bah! I thought, she would do the same thing my other mistress did. She would point me out as a ridiculous fool, and I would pay for it all in the eyes of the public. Between the man who doubts and the man who denies there is only a step. All philosophy is related to atheism. After having told Brigitte that I suspected her past conduct, I began to regard it with real suspicion. I came to imagine that Brigitte was deceiving me, she, who never left me at any hour of the day. I sometimes planned long absences in order to test her, as I supposed, but in truth it was only to give myself some excuse for suspicion and mockery. And then I took pleasure in observing that I had outgrown my foolish jealousy, which was the same as saying that I no longer esteemed her highly enough to be jealous of her. At first I kept such thoughts to myself, but soon found pleasure in revealing them to Brigitte. We went out for a walk. "That dress is pretty," I said. "Such and such a girl, belonging to one of my friends, has one like it." We were seated at table. "Come, my dear, my former mistress used to sing for me at dessert. It is understood that you are to imitate her." She sat at the piano. "Ah, pardon me, but will you play that waltz that was so popular last winter? That will remind me of happy times." Reader, that lasted 6 months. For 6 long months Brigitte, scandalized, exposed to the insults of the world, had to endure from me all the wrongs that a wrathful and cruel libertine could inflict on woman. Coming from these frightful scenes, in which my own spirit exhausted itself in suffering and painful contemplation of the past, recovering from that frenzy a strange access of love, an extreme exaltation, led me to treat my mistress like an idol, like a divinity. A quarter of an hour after having insulted her, I was on my knees before her. When I was not accusing her of some crime, I was begging her pardon. When I was not mocking, I was weeping. Then I was seized by a delirium of joy. I almost lost my reason in the violence of my transports. I did not know what to do, what to say, what to think, in order to repair the evil I had done. I took Brigitte in my arms and made her repeat 100 times that she loved me, and that she pardoned me. I threatened to expiate my evil deeds by blowing out my brains if I ever ill-treated her again. These periods of exaltation sometimes lasted several hours, during which time I exhausted myself in foolish expressions of love and esteem. Then morning came, day appeared. I fell asleep from sheer exhaustion, and I awakened with a smile on my lips, mocking at everything, believing in nothing. During these terrible hours, Brigitte appeared to forget that there was another man in me than the one she saw. When I asked her pardon, she shrugged her shoulders as though to say, "Do you not know that I pardon you?" She would not complain as long as a spark of love remained in my heart. She assured me that all was good and sweet coming from me, insults as well as tears. And yet as time passed, my evil grew worse. My moments of malignity and irony became more somber and intractable. A real physical fever attended my outbursts of passion. I awakened trembling in every limb and covered with cold sweat. Brigitte, too, although she did not complain of it, began to fail in health. When I began to abuse her, she would leave me without a word and lock herself in her room. Thank God I have never raised my hand against her. In my most violent moments, I would rather die than touch her. One evening the rain was beating against the windows. We were alone, the curtains closed. "I am in happy humor this evening," I said to Brigitte, "and yet the beastly weather saddens me. Let us seek some diversion in spite of the storm." I arose and lighted all the candles I could find. The room was small and the illumination brilliant. At the same time a bright fire threw out a stifling heat. "Come," I said. "What shall we do while waiting until it is time for supper?" I happened to remember that it was carnival time in Paris. I seemed to see the carriages filled with masks crossing the boulevards. I heard the shouts of the crowds before the theatres. I saw the lascivious dances, the gay costumes, the wine and the folly. All of my youth bounded in my heart. "Let us disguise ourselves," I said to Brigitte. "It will be for us alone, but what does that matter? If you have no costumes, we can make them and pass away the time agreeably." We searched in the closet for dresses, cloaks, and artificial flowers. Brigitte, as usual, was patient and cheerful. We both arranged a sort of travesty. She wanted to dress my hair herself. We painted and powdered ourselves freely. All that we lacked was found in an old chest that belonged, I believe, to the aunt. In an hour we could not recognize each other. The evening passed in singing, in 1,000 follies. Toward 1 in the morning it was time for supper. We had ransacked all the closets. There was one near me that remained open. While sitting down at the table, I perceived on a shelf the book of which I have already spoken, the one in which Brigitte was accustomed to write. "Is it not a collection of your thoughts?" I asked, stretching out my hand and taking the book down. "If I may, allow me to look at it." I opened the book, although Brigitte made a gesture as though to prevent me. On the first page I read these words: "This is my last will and testament." Everything was written in a firm hand. I found first a faithful recital of all that Brigitte had suffered on my account since she had been my mistress. She announced her firm determination to endure everything so long as I loved her and to die when I left her. Her daily life was recorded there. What she had lost, what she had hoped, the isolation she experienced even in my presence, the barrier that was growing up between us, the cruelties I subjected her to in return for her love and her resignation. All that was written down without a complaint. On the contrary, she undertook to justify me. Then followed personal details, the disposition of her effects. She would end her life by poison, she wrote. She would die by her own hand, and expressly forbid that her death should be charged to me. "Pray for him," such were her last words. I found in the closet on the same shelf a little box that I remembered I had seen before, filled with a fine bluish powder resembling salt. "What is this?" I asked of Brigitte, raising the box to my lips. She gave vent to a scream of terror and threw herself upon me. "Brigitte," I said, "tell me adieu. I shall carry this box away with me. You will forget me, and you will live if you wish to save me from becoming a murderer. I will set out this very night. You will agree with me that God demands it. Give me a last kiss." I bent over her and kissed her forehead. "Not yet!" she cried in anguish, but I repulsed her and left the room. 3 hours later I was ready to set out, and the horses were at the door. It was still raining when I entered the carriage. At the moment the carriage was starting, I felt 2 arms about my neck and a sob on my breast. It was Brigitte. I did all I could to persuade her to remain. I ordered the driver to stop. I even told her that I would return to her when time should have effaced the memory of the wrongs I had done her. I forced myself to prove to her that yesterday was the same as today, today as yesterday. I repeated that I could only render her unhappy, that to attach herself to me was but to make an assassin of me. I resorted to prayers, to vows, to threats even. Her only reply was, "You are going away. Take me. Let us take leave of the country. Let us take leave of the past. We cannot live here. Let us go elsewhere, wherever you please. Let us go and die together in some remote corner of the world. We must be happy, I by you, you by me." I kissed her with such passion that I feared my heart would burst. "Drive on!" I cried to the coachman. We threw ourselves into each other's arms, and the horses set out at a gallop. End of chapter 6, part 4, book 2. End of part 4. End of book 2. Chapter 1, part 5, book 3 of Confession of a Child of the Century. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jessi. Confession of a Child of the Century by Alfred de MUSSET. Translated by Kendall Warren. Book 3, Part 5, Chapter 1. Having decided on a long tour, we went first to Paris. The necessary preparations required time, and we took a furnished apartment for 1 month. The decision to leave France had changed everything. Joy, hope, confidence, all returned. No more sorrow, no more grief over approaching separation. It was now nothing but dreams of happiness and vows of eternal love. I wished once for all to make my dear mistress forget all the suffering I had caused her. How had I been able to resist such proofs of tender affection and courageous resignation? Not only did Brigitte pardon me, but she was willing to make a still greater sacrifice and leave everything for me. As I felt myself unworthy of the devotion she exhibited, I wished to requite her by my love. At last my good angel had triumphed, and admiration and love resumed their sway in my heart. Brigitte and I examined a map to determine where we should go to bury ourselves from the world. We had not yet decided, and we found pleasure in that very uncertainty. While glancing over the map, we said, "Where shall we go? What shall we do? Where shall we begin life anew?" How shall I tell how deeply I repented my cruelty when I looked upon her smiling face, a face that laughed at the future, although still pale from the sorrows of the past? Happy projects of future joy! You are perhaps the only true happiness known to man. For 8 days we spent our time making purchases and preparing for our departure. Then a young man presented himself at our apartments. He brought letters to Brigitte. After their interview, I found her sad and distraught. But I could not guess the cause, unless the letters were from N., that village where I had confessed my love and where Brigitte's only relatives lived. Nevertheless, our preparations progressed rapidly, and I became impatient to get away. At the same time, I was so happy that I could hardly rest. When I arose in the morning, and the sun was shining through our windows, I experienced such transports of joy that I was almost intoxicated with happiness. So anxious was I to prove the sincerity of my love for Brigitte that I hardly dared kiss the hem of her dress. Her lightest words made me tremble as though her voice was strange to me. I alternated between tears and laughter, and I never spoke of the past except with horror and disgust. Our room was full of our goods scattered about in disorder. Albums, pictures, books and the dear map we loved so much. We were going and coming about the room. Every few moments I would stop and kneel before Brigitte, who would call me an idler, saying that she had to do all the work and that I was good for nothing. And all sorts of projects flitted through our minds. Sicily was far away, but the winters are so delightful there. Genoa is very pretty with its painted houses, its green gardens, and the Apennines in the background. But what noise! What crowds! Out of every 3 men on the street, 1 is a monk and another a soldier. Florence is sad. It is the Middle Ages living in the midst of modern life. How can anyone endure those grilled windows and that horrible brown color with which all the houses are soiled? What could we do at Rome? We are not traveling in order to forget ourselves, much less for the sake of instruction. To the Rhine? But the season is over, and although we do not care for the world of fashion, still it is sad to visit its haunts when it has fled them. But Spain? Too many restrictions there. One has to travel like an army on the march and may expect everything except repose. Let us go to Switzerland. Too many people go there, and most of them are deceived as to the nature of its attractions. But it is there are unfolded the 3 most beautiful colors on God's earth: the azure of the sky, the verdure of the plains, and the whiteness of the snows on the summits of glaciers. Let us go, let us go, cried Brigitte. Let us fly away like 2 birds. Let us pretend, my dear Octave, that we just met each other yesterday. You met me at a ball, I pleased you, and I love you. You tell me that some leagues distant, in a certain little town, you loved a certain Madame Pierson. What passed between you and her I do not know. You will not tell me the story of your love for another. And I will whisper to you that not long since I loved a terrible fellow who made me very unhappy. You will reprove me and close my mouth, and we will agree never to speak of such things." When Brigitte spoke thus, I experienced a feeling that resembled avarice. I caught her in my arms and cried, "Oh, God! I know not whether it is with joy or with fear that I tremble. I am about to carry off my treasure. Die, my youth, die all memories of the past, die all cares and regrets. Oh, my good, brave mistress! You have made a man out of a child. If I lose you now, I will never love again. Perhaps before I knew you, another woman might have cured me. But now you, alone of all the world, have power to destroy me or to save me, for I bear on my heart the wound of all the evil I have done you. I have been an ingrate, blind and cruel. God be praised, you love me still. If you ever return to that home under those lindens where I first met you, look carefully about that deserted house. You will find a phantom there, for the man who left it and went away with you is not the man who entered it." "Is it true?" said Brigitte, and her head, all radiant with love, was raised to heaven. "Is it true that I am yours?" "Yes, far from this odious world in which you have grown old before your time. Yes, my child, you are going to love. I will have you such as you are, and wherever we go you will forget the day when you will no longer love me. My mission will have been accomplished, and I shall always be thankful for it." Finally, we decided to go to Geneva, and then choose some resting place in the Alps. Brigitte was enthusiastic about the lake. I thought I could already breathe the air which floats over its surface and the odor of the verdure-clad valley. Already Lausanne, Vevey, Oberland, and beyond the summits of Monte Rosa and the immense plain of Lombardy. Already oblivion, repose, flight, all the delights of happy solitude invited us. Already, when in the evening with joined hands we looked at one another in silence, we felt rising within us that sentiment of strange grandeur which takes possession of the heart on the eve of a long journey, mysterious and indescribable vertigo, which has in it something of the terrors of exile and the hopes of a pilgrimage. Are there not in the human mind wings that flutter and sonorous chords that vibrate? How shall I describe it? Is there not a world of meaning in the simple words, "All is ready, we are about to go"? Suddenly Brigitte became languid. She bowed her head and was silent. When I asked her if she was in pain, she said no in a voice that was scarcely audible. When I spoke of our departure, she arose, cold and resigned, and continued her preparations. When I swore to her that she was going to be happy and that I would consecrate my life to her, she shut herself up in her room and wept. When I kissed her, she turned pale and averted her eyes as my lips approached hers. When I told her that nothing had yet been done, that it was not too late to renounce our plans, she frowned severely. When I begged her to open her heart to me, and I told her I would die rather than cause her one regret, she threw her arms about my neck, then stopped and repulsed me as though involuntarily. Finally I entered her room holding in my hand a ticket on which our places were marked for the carriage to Besançon. I approached her and placed it in her lap. She stretched out her hand, screamed, and fell unconscious at my feet. End of Chapter 1, Part 5, Book 3. Chapter 2, Part 5, Book 3 of Confession of a Child of the Century. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jessi. Confession of a Child of the Century by Alfred de MUSSET. Translated by Kendall Warren. Book 3, Part 5, Chapter 2. All my efforts to divine the cause of so unexpected a change were as vain as the questions I had first asked. Brigitte was ill and obstinately remained silent. After an entire day passed in supplication and conjecture, I went out without knowing where I was going. Passing the opera, I entered it from force of habit. I could pay no attention to what was going on in the theatre. I was so overwhelmed with grief, so stupefied that I did not live, so to speak, except in myself, and exterior objects made no impression on my senses. All my powers were centered on a single thought, and the more I turned it over in my head, the less clearly could I distinguish its meaning. What obstacle was this that had so suddenly come between us and the realization of our fondest hopes? If it was merely some ordinary event, or even an actual misfortune, such as an accident or loss of some friend, why that obstinate silence? After all that Brigitte had done, when our dream seemed about to be realized, what could be the nature of a secret that destroyed our happiness and could not be confided to me? What? She concealed it from me. And yet I could not find it in my heart to suspect her. The appearance of suspicion revolted me and filled me with horror. On the other hand, how could I conceive of inconstancy or of caprice in that woman such as I knew her? I was lost in the abyss of doubt, and I could not discover a gleam of light, the smallest point on which to base conjecture. In front of me in the gallery sat a young man whose face was not unknown to me. As often happens when one is preoccupied, I looked at him without thinking of him as a personal identity or trying to fit a name on him. Suddenly I recognized him. It was he who had brought letters to Brigitte from N. I arose and started to accost him without thinking what I was doing. He occupied a place that I could not reach without disturbing a large number of spectators, and I was forced to await the entr'acte. My first thought was that if anyone could enlighten me, it was this young man. He had had several interviews with Madame Pierson the last few days, and I recalled the fact that she was always much depressed after his visits. He had seen her the morning of the day she was taken ill. The letters he brought Brigitte had not been shown me. It was possible that he knew the reason why our departure was delayed. Perhaps he did not know all the circumstances, but he could doubtless enlighten me as to the contents of those letters, and there was no reason why I should hesitate about questioning him. When the curtain fell, I followed him to the foyer. I do not know that he saw me coming, but he hastened away and entered the box. I determined to wait until he should come out, and stood looking at the box for 15 minutes. At last he appeared. I bowed and approached him. He hesitated a moment, then turned and disappeared down a stairway. My desire to speak to him had been too evident to admit of any other explanation than deliberate intention to avoid me on his part. He surely knew my face, and whether he knew it or not, a man who sees another approaching him ought at least to wait for him. We were the only ones in the corridor at the time, and there could be no doubt he did not wish to speak to me. I did not dream of such impertinent treatment from a man whom I had cordially received at my apartments. Why should he insult me? He could have no other excuse than a desire to avoid an awkward interview during which questions might be asked which he did not care to answer. But why? This second mystery troubled me almost as much as the first. Although I tried to drive the thought from my head, that young man's action in avoiding me seemed to have some connection with Brigitte's obstinate silence. Uncertainty is of all torments the most difficult to endure, and during my life I have exposed myself to many dangers because I could not wait patiently. When I returned to my apartments, I found Brigitte reading those same fateful letters from N. I told her that I could not remain longer in suspense, and that I wished to be relieved from it at any cost, that I desired to know the cause of the sudden change which had taken place in her, and that if she refused to speak, I would look upon her silence as a positive refusal to go abroad with me and an order for me to leave her forever. She reluctantly handed me the letters she was reading. Her relatives had written her that her departure had disgraced them, that everyone knew the circumstances, and that they felt it their duty to warn her of the consequences. That she was living openly as my mistress, and that, although she was a widow and free to do as she chose, she ought to think of the name she bore, that neither they nor her old friends would ever see her again if she persisted in her course. Finally, by all sorts of threats and entreaties, they urged her to return. The tone of that letter angered me, and at first I took it as an insult. "And that young man who brings you these remonstrances," I cried, "doubtless has orders to deliver them personally, and does not fail to do his own part to the best of his ability. Am I not right?" Brigitte's dejection made me reflect and calm my wrath. "You will do as you wish and achieve my ruin," she said. "My fate rests with you. You have been for a long time my master. Avenge as you please the last effort my old friends have made to recall me to reason, to the world that I formerly respected, to the honor that I have lost. I have not a word to say, and if you wish to dictate my reply, I will obey you." "I care to know nothing," I replied, "but your intentions. It is for me to comply with your wishes, and I assure you I am ready to do it. Tell me, do you desire to remain, to go away, or shall I go alone?" "Why that question?" asked Brigitte. "Have I said that I had changed my mind? I am unwell and cannot travel in my present condition, but when I recover we will go to Geneva as we have planned." We separated at these words, and the coldness with which she had expressed her resolution saddened me more than a refusal. It was not the first time our liaison had been threatened by her relatives, but up to this time, whatever letters Brigitte had received, she had never taken so much to heart. How could I bring myself to believe that Brigitte had been so affected by protests which in less happy moments had had no effect on her? Could it be merely the weakness of a woman who recoils from an act of final significance? "I will do as you please," she had said. "No, it does not please me to demand patience, and rather than look at that sorrowful face even a week longer, unless she speaks, I will set out alone." Fool that I was! Had I the strength to do it? I did not close my eyes that night, and the next morning I resolved to call on that young man I had seen at the opera. I do not know whether it was wrath or curiosity that impelled me to this course, nor did I know just what I desired to learn of him, but I reflected that he could not avoid me this time, and that was all I wanted. As I did not know his address, I asked Brigitte for it, pretending that I felt under obligations to call on him after all the visits he had made us. I had not said a word about my experience at the opera. Brigitte's eyes betrayed signs of tears. When I entered her room, she held out her hand and said, "What do you wish?" Her voice was sad but tender. We exchanged a few kind words, and I set out less unhappy. The name of the young man I was going to see was Smith. He was living nearby. When I knocked at his door, I experienced a strange sensation of uneasiness. I was dazed, as though by a sudden flash of light. His first gesture froze my blood. He was in bed, and with the same accent Brigitte had employed, with a face as pale and haggard as hers, he held out his hand and said, "What do you wish?" Say what you please, there are things in a man's life which the reason can not explain. I sat still as though awakened from a dream and began to repeat his questions. Why, in fact, had I come to see him? How could I tell him what had brought me there? Even if he had anything to tell me, how did I know he would speak? He had brought letters from Anne, and knew those who had written them, but it cost me an effort to question him, and I feared he would suspect what was in my mind. Our first words were polite and insignificant. I thanked him for his kindness in bringing letters to Madame Pierson. I told him that upon leaving France, we would ask him to do the same favor for us. And then we were silent, surprised to find ourselves vis-à-vis. I looked about me in embarrassment. His room was on the 4th floor. Everything indicated honest and industrious poverty. Some books, musical instruments, papers, a table and a few chairs, that was all, but everything was well cared for and presented an agreeable ensemble. As for him, his frank and animated face predisposed me in his favor. On the mantel I observed a picture of an old lady. I stepped up to look at it, and he said it was his mother. I then recalled that Brigitte had often spoken of him. She had known him since childhood. Before I came to the country, she used to see him occasionally at N, but at the time of her last visit there he was away. It was therefore only by chance that I had learned some particulars of his life, which now came to mind. He had an honest employment that enabled him to support his sister and mother. His treatment of these 2 women deserved the highest praise. He deprived himself of everything for them. But although he possessed musical talents that would have enabled him to make a fortune, the immediate needs of those dependent on him and an extreme reserve had always led him to prefer an assured income to the uncertain chances of success in larger ventures. In a word, he belonged to that small class who live quietly and who are worth more to the world than those who do not appreciate them. I had learned of certain traits in his character which will serve to paint the man. He had fallen in love with a beautiful girl in the neighborhood, and after a year of devotion to her, secured her parents' consent to their union. She was as poor as he. The contract was ready to be signed, the preparations for the wedding complete, when his mother said, "And your sister? Who will marry her?" That simple remark made him understand that if he married, he would spend all his money in the household expenses, and his sister would have no dowry. He broke off the engagement, bravely renouncing his happy prospects. He then came to Paris. When I heard that story, I wanted to see the hero. That simple, unassuming act of devotion seemed to me more admirable than all the glories of war. The more I examined that young man, the less I felt inclined to broach the subject nearest my heart. The idea which had first occurred to me, that he would harm me in Brigitte's eyes, vanished at once. Gradually my thoughts took another course. I looked at him attentively, and it seemed to me that he was also examining me with curiosity. We were both 21 years of age, but what a difference between us! He was accustomed to an existence regulated by the graduated tick of the clock, never having seen anything of life except that part of it which lies between an obscure room on the 4th floor and a dingy government office, sending his mother all his savings, that farthing of human joy which the hand of toil clasps so greedily, having no thought except for the happiness of others, and that since his childhood, since he had been a babe in arms. And I, during that precious time, so swift, so inexorable, during that time that with him was bathed in sweat, what had I done? Was I a man? Which of us had lived? What I have said in a page can be comprehended in a glance. He spoke to me of our journey and the countries we were going to visit. "When do you go?" he asked. "I do not know. Madame Pierson is unwell and has been confined to her bed for 3 days." "For 3 days!" he repeated in surprise. "Yes. Why are you astonished?" He arose and threw himself on me, his arms extended, his eyes fixed. He was trembling violently. "Are you ill?" I asked, taking him by the hand. He pressed his hand to his head and burst into tears. When he had recovered sufficiently to speak, he said, "Pardon me. Be good enough to leave me. I fear I am not well. When I have sufficiently recovered, I will return your visit." End of Chapter 2, Part 5, Book 3.
Chapter number 3, Part 5, Book 3, of Confession of a Child of the Centenary. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Thomas Kooz, Kooz Confession of a Child of the Century by Alfred de MUSSET. Translated by Kendall Warren. Book 3, Part 5, Chapter 3. Bridget was better. She had informed me that she wished to go away as soon as she was well enough to travel, but I insisted that she ought to rest at least 15 days before undertaking a long journey. Whenever I attempted to persuade her to speak frankly, she assured me that the letter was the only cause of her melancholy and begged me to say nothing more about it. Then I tried in vain to guess what was passing in her heart. We went to the theatre every night in order to avoid embarrassing tete-a-tetes. There, we sometimes pressed each other's hands at some fine bit of acting or beautiful strain of music, or exchanged, perhaps, a friendly glance. But going and returning, we were mute, absorbed in our thoughts. Smith came almost every day. Although his presence in the house had been the cause of all my sorrow, and although my visit to him had left singular suspicions in my mind, still his apparent good faith and his simplicity reassured me. I had spoken to him of the letters he had brought, and he did not appear offended, but saddened. He was ignorant of the contents of his friendship, for Bridget led him to censure them severely. He would have refused to carry them, he said, if he knew what they contained. On account of Bridget's tone of reserve in his presence, I did not think he was in her confidence. I therefore welcomed him with pleasure, although there was always a sort of awkward embarrassment in our meeting. He was asked to act as intermediary between Bridget and her relatives after our departure. When we three were together, he noticed a certain coolness and restraint, which he endeavored to banish by cheerful good humor. If he spoke of our liaison, it was with respect and as a man who looks upon love as a sacred bond. In fact, he was a kind friend, and he inspired me with full confidence. But despite all that, despite all his efforts, he was sad, and I could not obliterate strange thoughts that came to my mind. The tears I had seen that young man shed, his illness coming on at the same time as Bridget's. I know not what melancholy sympathy I thought I discovered between them, troubled and disquieted me. Not over a month ago, I would have become violently jealous, but now, of what could I suspect Bridget? Whatever the secret she was concealing from me, was she not going away with me? Even if it were possible that Smith could be in some secret of which I knew nothing, what could be the nature of that mystery? What was there to be censured in their sadness and in their friendship? She had known him as a child. She met him again after long years, just as she was about to leave France. She chanced to be in an unfortunate situation, and fate decreed that he should be the instrument of adding to her sorrow. Was it not natural that they should exchange sorrowful glances, that the sight of this young man should awaken memories and regrets? Could he, on the other hand, see her start off on a long journey, prescribed and almost abandoned, without grave apprehensions? I felt that this must be the explanation, and that it was my duty to assure them that I was capable of protecting the one from all dangers, and of requiting the other for the services he had rendered. And yet a deadly sense of coldness oppressed me, and I could not determine what course to pursue. When Smith left us in the evening, we either kept silence or talked of him. I do not know what fatal attraction led me to ask about him continually. She, however, told me just what I have told the reader. His life had never been other than it was at this time, poor, obscure, and honest. I made her repeat the story of his life a number of times without knowing why I took such an interest in it. There was in my heart a secret cause of sorrow which I could not confess. If that young man had arrived at the time of our greatest happiness, had he brought an insignificant letter to Bridget, had he pressed her hand while assisting her into the carriage, would I have paid the least attention to it? Had he recognized me at the opera, or had he not? Had he shed tears for some unknown reason? What would it matter so long as I was happy? But while unable to divine the cause of Bridget's sorrow, I saw that my past conduct, whatever she might say of it, had something to do with her present state. If I had been what I ought to have been for the last 6 months that we had lived together, nothing in the world, I was persuaded, could have troubled our love. Smith was only an ordinary man, but he was good and devoted. His simple and modest qualities resembled the large, pure lines which the eye seized at the first glance. One became acquainted with him in a quarter of an hour, and he inspired confidence, if not admiration. I could not help thinking that if he were Bridget's lover, she would cheerfully go with him to the ends of the earth. I had deferred our departure purposely, but now I began to regret it. Bridget, too, at times urged me to hasten the day. "Why do we wait?" she asked. "Here I am recovered, and everything is ready." Why did we wait indeed? I do not know. Seated near the fire, my eyes wandered from Smith to my mistress. I saw that they were both pale, serious, silent. I did not know why they were thus, and I could not help repeating that there was but one cause, but one secret to learn. But that was not one of those vague, sickly suspicions, such as had formerly tormented me, but an instinct, persistent and fatal. What strange creatures we! It pleased me to leave them alone before the fire, and to go out on the quay to dream, leaning on the parapet and looking at the water. When they spoke of their life at N, and when Bridget, almost cheerful, assumed a motherly air to recall some instant of her childhood days, it seemed to me that I suffered and yet took pleasure in it. I asked questions. I spoke to Smith of his mother, of his plans and his prospects. I gave him an opportunity to show himself in a favorable light, and forced his modesty to reveal his merit. You love your sister very much, do you not? I asked. When do you expect her to marry? He blushed and replied that his expenses were rather heavy, but that it would probably be within 2 years, perhaps sooner, if his health would permit him to do some extra work which would bring in enough to provide her dowry, that there was a family in the country whose eldest son was her friend, that they were almost agreed on it, and that fortune would one day come, like rest, without thinking of it, that he had set aside for his sister a part of the money left by their father, that their mother was hoping to it, but that he would insist on it, that a young man may live from hand to mouth, but that the fate of a young girl is fixed on the day of her marriage. Thus, little by little, he expressed what was in his heart, and I watched Bridget listening to him. Then, when he arose to leave us, I accompanied him to the door and stood there, pensively listening to the sound of his footsteps on the stairs. Upon examining our trunks, we found that there were still a few things needed before we could start. Smith was asked to purchase them. He was remarkably active and enjoyed attending to matters of this kind. When I returned to my apartments, I found him on the floor, strapping a trunk. Bridget was at the piano we had rented by the week during our stay. She was playing one of those old airs into which she put so much expression and which were so dear to us. I stopped in the hall. Every note reached my ear distinctly. Never had she sung so sadly, so divinely. Smith was listening with pleasure. He was on his knees, holding the buckle of the strap in his hands. He fastened it, then looked about the room at the other goods he had packed and covered with a linen cloth. Satisfied with his work, he still remained kneeling in the same spot. Bridget, her hands on the keys, was looking out at the horizon. For the same time, I saw tears fall from the young man's eyes. I was ready to shed tears myself, and not knowing what was passing in me, I held out my hand to him. "Were you there?" asked Bridget. She trembled and seemed surprised. "Yes, I was there," I replied. "Sing, my dear, I beg of you. Let me hear your sweet voice." She continued her song without a word. She noticed my emotion as well as Smith's. Her voice faltered. With the last notes, she arose and came to me and kissed me. On another occasion, I had bought an album containing views of Switzerland. We were looking at them, all three of us, and when Bridget found a sight that pleased her, she would stop to examine it. There was one view that seemed to please her more than all the others. It was a certain spot in the canton of Vaud, some distance between Bruges. Some trees with cows gazing in the shade. In the distance, a village consisting of some dozen houses, scattered here and there. In the foreground, a young girl with a large straw hat, seated under a tree, and a farmer's boy standing before her, apparently pointing out, with his iron-tipped stick, the route over which he had come. He was directing her attention to a winding path that led to the mountain. Above them were the Alps, and the picture was crowned by 3 snow-capped summits. Nothing could be more simple or more beautiful than this landscape. The valley resembled a lake of verdure, and the eye followed its contour with delight. "Shall we go there?" asked Bridget. I took a pencil and traced some figures on the picture. "What are you doing?" she asked. "I am trying to see if I can not change that face slightly and make it resemble yours. The pretty hat would become you, and can I not, if I am skilful, give that fine mountaineer some resemblance to me?" The whim seemed to please her, and she set about rubbing out the 2 faces. When I had painted her portrait, she wished to try mine. The faces were very small, hence not very difficult. It was agreed that the likeness were striking. While we were laughing at it, the door opened, and I was called away by the servant. When I returned, Smith was leaning on the table and looking at the picture with interest. He was absorbed in a profound reverie, and was not aware of my presence. I sat down near the fire, and it was not until I spoke to Bridget that he raised his head. He looked at us a moment, then hastily took his leave, and, as he approached the door, I saw him strike his forehead with his hand. When I discovered these signs of grief, I said to myself, "What does it mean?" Then I clasped my hands to plead. With whom? I do not know. Perhaps my good angel, perhaps my evil destiny. End of Chapter 3, Part 5, Book 3. Recording by John Thomas Kooz. John Thomas Kooz Kosmarski. www.johnkooz.com.
Chapter 4, Part 5, Book 3 of Confession of a Child of the Century. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Confession of a Child of the Century by Alfred de MUSSET, translated by Kendall Warren. Book 3, Part 5, Chapter 4. My heart yearned to set out, and yet I delayed. Some secret influence rooted me to the spot. When Smith came, I knew no repose from the time he entered the room. How is it that we frequently seem to enjoy unhappiness? One day a word, a flush, a glance made me shudder. Another day, another glance, another word, threw me into uncertainty. Why are they both so sad? Why am I as motionless as a statue where I had formerly been violent? Every evening I sat on my bed and said to myself, "Let me see, let me think that over." Then I sprang to my feet crying, "Impossible!" The next day I did the same thing. In Smith's presence, Bridget treated me with more tenderness than when we were alone. It happened one evening that some hard words escaped us. When she heard his voice in the hall, she came and sat on my knees. As for him, it seemed to me he was always making an effort to control himself. His gestures were carefully regulated. He spoke slowly and prudently, so that his occasional moments of forgetfulness seemed all the more striking. Was it curiosity that tormented me? I remember that one day I saw a man drowning near Point Royal. It was midsummer, and we were rowing on the river. Some 30 boats were crowded together under the bridge when, suddenly, one of the occupants of a boat near mine threw up his hands and fell overboard. We immediately began diving for him, but in vain. Some hours later the body was found under a raft. I shall never forget my experience as I was diving for that man. I opened my eyes under the water and searched painfully here and there in the dark corners about the pier. Then I returned to the surface for breath, then resumed my horrible search. I was filled with hope and terror. The thought that I might feel myself seized by convulsive arms allured me, and at the same time thrilled me with horror. When I was exhausted with fatigue, I climbed back into my boat. Unless a man is brutalized by debauchery, eager curiosity is one of his marked traits. I have already remarked that I felt it on the occasion of my first visit to Desgenais. I will explain my meaning. The truth, that skeleton of appearances, ordains that every man, whatsoever he be, shall come in his day and hour to touch the bones that lie forever at the bottom of some chance experience. It is called knowing the world, and experience is purchased at that price. It happens that some recoil in terror before that test, others, feeble and affrighted, vacillate like shadows. Some, the best perhaps, die at once. The large number forget, and thus all float on to death. But there are some men who, at the fell stroke of misfortune, neither die nor forget. When it comes their turn to touch misfortune, otherwise called truth, they approach it with a firm step and outstretched hand, and, horrible to say, they mistake love for the livid corpse they have found at the bottom of the river. They seize it, feel it, clasp it in their arms. Behold them, drunk with the desire to know. They no longer look with interest upon things, except to see them pass. They do nothing except doubt and test. They ransack the world as though they were God's spies. They sharpen their thoughts into arrows, and they give birth to a monster. The debauchees, more than all others, are exposed to that fury, and the reason is very simple. Ordinary life is the limpid surface. The debauchees, the rapid current turning over and over, and at times touching the bottom. Coming from a ball, for instance, where they have danced with a modest girl, they seek the company of bad characters, and spend the night in riotous feasting. The last words they addressed to a beautiful and virtuous woman are still on their lips. They repeat them and burst into laughter. Shall I say it? Do they not raise, for some pieces of silver, the vesture of chastity, that robe so full of mystery, that seems to respect the being it embellishes and surrounds without touching? What idea can they have of the world? They are like comedians in the green room. Who, more than they, is skilled in that research at the bottom of things, in that groping, profound and impious? See how they speak of everything, always in terms the most barren, the most crude and abject. Such words appear true to them. All the rest is only parade, convention, prejudice. Let them tell a story, let them recount some experience, they will always use the same dirty and material expression, always the letter, always death. They do not say, "That woman loved me." They say, "I have possessed that woman." They do not say, "I love." They say, "I desire." They never say, "If God wills." They say, "If I will." I do not know what they think of themselves and such monologues as these. Hence, of a necessity, either idleness or curiosity. For while they strive to find what there is of evil, they do not understand that others still believe in the good. Therefore, they are either so nonchalant that they stop their ears, or the noise of the rest of the world suddenly startles them from sleep. The father allows his son to go where so many others go, where Cato himself went. He says that youth is but a stage. But when he returns, the youth looks upon his sister, and sees what has taken place in him during an hour passed in the society of brutal reality. He says to himself, "My sister is not like that creature I have just left." And from that day he is disturbed and uneasy. Sinful curiosity is a vile malady born of all impure contact. It is the prowling instinct of phantoms who raise the lids of tombs. It is the inexplicable torture with which God punishes those who have sinned. They wish to believe that all sin as they have done, and would be disappointed perhaps to find that it is not so. But they inquire, they search, they dispute, they hang their heads on one side, as does an architect who adjusts a pillar, and thus strive to find what they desire to know. Given proof of evil, they laugh at it. Doubtful of evil, they swear that it exists. The good they refuse to recognize. Who knows? Behold the grand formula, the first words that Satan spoke when he saw heaven closing against him. Alas, how many evils are those words responsible for? How many disasters and deaths, how many strokes of terrible scythes in the ripening harvest of humanity? How many hearts, how many families where there is naught but ruin, since that word was first heard? Who knows? Who knows? Loathsome words! Rather than pronounce them, one should do as the sheep who graze about the slaughter-house and know it not. That is better than to be a strong spirit and read La Rochefoucauld. What better illustration could I present than the one I have just given? My mistress was ready to set out, and I had but to say the word. Why did I delay? What would have been the result if I had started at once on our trip? Nothing but a moment of apprehension that would have been forgotten after traveling 3 days. When with me, she had no thought but of me. Why should I care to solve the mystery that did not threaten my happiness? She would have consented, and that would have been the end of it. A kiss on her lips, and all would be well. Instead of that, see what I did. One evening, when Smith had dined with us, I retired at an early hour and left them together. As I closed my door, I heard Bridget order some tea. In the morning I happened to approach her table, and, sitting beside the teapot, I saw but one cup. No one had been in the room before me that morning, so the servant could not have carried away anything that had been used the night before. I searched everywhere for a second cup, but could find none. "Did Smith stay late?" I asked of Bridget. "He left about midnight." "Did you retire alone, or did you call some one to assist you?" "I retired alone. Every one in the house was asleep." I continued my search, and my hands trembled. In what burlesque comedy is there a jealous lover so stupid as to inquire what has become of a cup? Why seek to discover whether Smith and Madame Pierson had drunk from the same cup? What a brilliant idea, that! Nevertheless, I found the cup, and I burst into laughter, and threw it on the floor with such violence that it broke into 1,000 pieces. I ground the pieces under my feet. Bridget looked at me without saying a word. During the 2 succeeding days, she treated me with a coldness that had something of contempt in it, and I saw that she treated Smith with more deference and kindness than usual. She called him Henry, and smiled on him sweetly. "I feel that the air would do me good," she said after dinner. "Shall we go to the opera, Octave? I would enjoy walking that far." "No, I will stay here. Go without me." She took Smith's arm and went out. I remained alone all the evening. I had paper before me, and I was trying to collect my thoughts in order to write, but in vain. As a lonely lover draws from his bosom a letter from his mistress, and loses himself in delightful reverie, thus I shut myself up in solitude, and yielded to the sweet allurement of doubt. Before me were the 2 empty seats which Bridget and Smith had just occupied. I scrutinized them eagerly, as though they could tell me something. I revolved in my mind all the things I had heard and seen. From time to time I went to the door and cast my eyes over our trunks which had been piled against the wall for a month. I opened them and examined the contents so carefully packed away by those delicate little hands. I listened to the sound of passing carriages. The slightest noise made me tremble. I spread out on the table our map of Europe, and there in the very presence of all my hopes, in that room where I had conceived and so nearly realized them, I abandoned myself to the most frightful presentiments. But strange as it may seem, I felt neither anger nor jealousy, but a terrible sense of sorrow and foreboding. I did not suspect, and yet I doubted. The mind of man is so strangely formed that, with what he sees, and in spite of what he sees, he can conjure up 100 objects of woe. In truth, his brain resembles the dungeons of the Inquisition, whose walls are covered with so many instruments of torture, that one is dazed and asks whether these horrible contrivances he sees before him are pincers or playthings. Tell me, I say, what difference is there in saying to my mistress, "All women deceive," or "You deceive me"? What passed through my mind was perhaps as subtle as the finest sophistry. It was a sort of dialogue between the mind and the conscience. "If I should lose Bridget?" I said to the mind. "She departs with you," said the conscience. "If she deceives me?" "How can she deceive you? Has she not made out her will asking for prayers for you?" "If Smith loves her?" "Fool, what does it matter so long as you know that she loves you?" "If she loves me, why is she sad?" "That is her secret. Respect it." "If I take her away with me, will she be happy?" "Love her, and she will be." "Why, when that man looks at her, does she seem to fear to meet his glance?" "Because she is a woman, and he is young." "Why does that young man turn pale when she looks at him?" "Because he is a man, and she is beautiful." "Why, when I went to see him, did he throw himself into my arms, and why did he weep and beat his head with his hands?" "Do not seek to know of what you must remain ignorant." "Why can I not know these things?" "Because you are miserable and weak, and all mystery is of God." "But why is it that I suffer? Why is it that my soul recoils in terror?" "Think of your father, and do good." "But why am I unable to do as he did? Why does evil attract me to itself?" "Get down on your knees and confess. If you believe in evil, it is because your ways have been evil. If my ways were evil, was it my fault? Why did the good betray me? Because you are in the shadow, would you deny the existence of light? If there are traitors, why are you one of them? Because I am afraid of becoming the dupe. Why do you spend your nights in watching? Why are you alone now? Because I think, I doubt, and I fear. When will you offer your prayer? When I believe. Why have they lied to me? Why do you lie, coward, at this very moment? Why not die if you cannot suffer? Thus spoke and groaned within me 2 voices, voices that were defiant and terrible. And then a third voice cried out, Alas, alas, my innocence! Alas, alas, the days that were! End of Chapter 4, Part 5, Book 3.
Chapter 5, Part 5, Book 3 of Confession of a Child of the Century. This is a LibriVox recording, and all LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Don Evans. Confession of a Child of the Century by Alfred de MUSSET. Translated by Kendall Warren. Book 3, Part 5, Chapter 5. What a powerful lever is the human thought! It is our defense and our safeguard, the most beautiful present that God has made us. It is ours, and it obeys us. We may shoot it forth into space, and, once outside of this feeble head, it is gone. We can no longer control it. While I was deferring the time of our departure from day to day, I was gradually losing strength, and although I did not perceive it, my vital forces were slowly wasting away. When I sat at table, I experienced a violent distaste for food. At night 2 pale faces, that of Brigitte and of Smith, pursued me through frightful dreams. When they went to the theater in the evening, I refused to go with them. Then, as I went alone and concealed myself in the parquet and watched them, I pretended that I had some business to attend to in a neighboring room, and I sat there an hour and listened to them. The idea occurred to me to seek a quarrel with Smith and force him to fight with me. I turned my back on him while he was talking. Then he came to me with a look of surprise on his face, holding out his hand. When I was alone in the night and everyone slept, I felt a strong desire to go to Brigitte's desk and take from it her papers. On one occasion I was obliged to go out of the house in order to resist the temptation. One day I felt like arming myself with a knife and threatening to kill them if they did not tell me why they were so sad. Another day I turned all this fury against myself. Oh, with what shame do I write it! And if anyone should ask me why I acted thus, I could not reply. To see, to doubt, to search, to torture myself and make myself miserable, to pass entire days with my ear to the keyhole and the night in a flood of tears, to repeat over and over that I would die of sorrow, to feel isolation and feebleness uprooting hope in my heart, to imagine that I was spying when I was only listening to the feverish beating of my own pulse, to con over stupid phrases such as "Life is a dream, there is nothing stable here below," to curse and blaspheme God through misery and through caprice. That was my joy, the precious occupation for which I renounced love, the air of heaven and liberty. Eternal God, liberty! Yes, there were certain moments when, in spite of all, I still thought of it. In the midst of my madness, eccentricity and stupidity, there were within me certain impulses that at times brought me to myself. It was a breath of air which struck my face as I came from my dungeon. It was a page of a book I read when, in my bitter days, I happened to read something beside those modern sycophants called pamphleteers, and who, out of regard for the public health, ought to be prevented from indulging in their crude philosophizing. Since I have referred to these good moments, let me mention one of them. They were so rare. One evening I was reading the Memoirs of Constant. I came to the following lines: Salsdorf, a Saxon surgeon attached to Prince Christian, had his leg broken by a shell in the battle of Wagram. He lay almost lifeless on the dusty field. 15 paces distant, Amadis of Kerbourg, aide de camp, I have forgotten of whom, wounded in the breast by a bullet, falls to the ground, vomiting blood. Salsdorf sees that if that young man is not cared for, he will die of apoplexy. Summoning all his powers, he painfully drags himself to the side of the wounded man, bleeds him, and saves his life. Salsdorf himself died 4 days later from the effects of amputation. When I read these words, I threw down my book and melted into tears. I do not regret those tears, for they were such as I could shed only when my heart was right. I do not speak merely of Salsdorf, and do not care for that particular instance. I am sure, however, that I did not suspect anyone that day. Poor dreamer! Ought I to remember that I have been other than I am? What good will it do me as I stretch out my arms in anguish to heaven and wait for the shell that will deliver me forever? Alas! That was only a gleam that flashed across the night of my life. Like those dervish fanatics who find ecstasy and vertigo when thought, turning on itself, exhausted by the stress of introspection, tired of vain effort, recoils in fright. Thus it would seem that man must be a void, and that by dint of delving within himself he reaches the last turn of a spiral. There, as on the summits of mountains and at the bottom of mines, air fails and God forbids man to go farther. Then, struck with a mortal chill, the heart, as though impaired by oblivion, seeks to escape into a new birth. It demands life of that which environs it. It eagerly drinks in the air, but it finds round about only its own chimeras, which have just animated its failing powers, and which, self-created, surround it like pitiless specters. This can not last long. Tired of uncertainty, I resolved to resort to a test that would discover the truth. I ordered post horses for 10 in the evening. We had hired a calash, and I gave direction that all should be ready at the hour indicated. At the same time I asked that nothing be said to Madame Pierson. Smith came to dinner. At the table I affected unusual cheerfulness, and without a word about my plans, I turned the conversation to our journey. I would renounce all idea of going away, I said, if I thought Brigitte did not care to go. I was so well satisfied with Paris that I asked nothing better than to remain as long as she pleased. I made much of all the pleasures of the city. I spoke of the balls, the theaters, of the many opportunities for diversion on every hand. In short, since we were happy, I did not see why we should make a change, and I did not think of going away at present. I was expecting her to insist that we carry out our plan of going to Geneva, and was not disappointed. However, she insisted but feebly, but after a few words I pretended to yield, and then, changing the subject, I spoke of other things as though it was all settled. "And why will not Smith go with us?" I asked. "It is very true that he has duties here, but can he not obtain leave of absence? Moreover, will not the talents he possesses, and which he is unwilling to use, assure him an honorable living anywhere? Let him come along with us. The carriage is large, and we offer him a place in it. A young man should see the world, and there is nothing so irksome for a man of his age as confinement in an office and restriction to a narrow circle. Is it not true?" I asked, turning to Brigitte. "Come, my dear, let your credit obtain from him what he might refuse me. Urge him to give us 6 weeks of his time. We will travel together, and after a tour of Switzerland he will return to his duties with new life." Brigitte joined her entreaties to mine, although she knew it was only a joke on my part. Smith could not leave Paris without danger of losing his position, and replied that he regretted being obliged to deny himself the pleasure of accompanying us. Nevertheless, I continued to press him, and ordering another bottle of wine, I repeated my invitation. After dinner I went out to assure myself that my orders were carried out. Then I returned in high spirits, and seating myself at the piano, I proposed some music. "Let us pass the evening here," I said. "Believe me, it is better than going to the theatre. I can not take part myself, but I can listen. We will make Smith play, if he tires of our company, and the time will pass pleasantly." Brigitte consented with good grace and began playing for us. Smith accompanied her on the violoncello. The materials for a bowl of punch were brought, and the flame of burning rum soon cheered us with its light. The piano was abandoned for the table. Then we had cards, everything passed off as I wished, and we succeeded in diverting ourselves to my heart's content. I had my eyes fixed on the clock and waited impatiently for the hands to mark the hour of 10. I was tormented with anxiety, but allowed them to see nothing. Finally the hour arrived. I heard the postilion's whip as the horses entered the court. Brigitte was seated near me. I took her by the hand and asked her if she was ready to depart. She looked at me with surprise, doubtless wondering if I was not joking. I told her that, at dinner, she had appeared so anxious to go that I had felt justified in sending for the horses, and that I went out for that purpose when I left the table. "Are you serious?" asked Brigitte. "Do you wish to set out to night?" "Why not?" I replied, "since we have agreed that we ought to leave Paris." "What, now, at this very moment?" "Certainly; have we not been ready for a month? You see, there is nothing to do but load our trunks on the calash. As we have decided to go, ought we not to go at once? I believe it is better to go now and put off nothing until to morrow. You are in the humor to travel to night, and I hasten to profit by it. Why wait longer and continue to put it off? I can not endure this life. You wish to go, do you not? Very well, let us go and be done with it." Profound silence ensued. Brigitte stepped to the window and satisfied herself that the calash was there. Moreover, the tone in which I spoke would admit of no doubt, and however hasty my action may have appeared to her, it was due to her own expressed desire. She could not deny her own words, nor find any pretext for further delay. Her decision was made promptly. She asked a few questions as though to assure herself that all the preparations had been made. Seeing that nothing had been omitted, she began to search here and there. She found her hat and shawl, then continued her search. "I am ready," she said. "Shall we go? We are really going." She took a light, went to my room, to her own, opened lockers and closets. She asked for the key to her secretary, which she said she had lost. Oh, where could that key be? She had it in her possession not an hour ago. "Come, come, I'm ready," she repeated in extreme agitation. "Let us go. Octave, let us set out at once." While speaking, she continued her search and then came and sat down near us. I was seated on the sofa watching Smith, who stood before me. He had not changed countenance and seemed neither troubled nor surprised. But 2 drops of sweat trickled down his forehead, and I heard an ivory counter crackle between his fingers, the pieces falling to the floor. He held out both hands to us. "Bon voyage, my friends," he said. Again silence. I was still watching him, waiting for him to add a word. "If there is some secret here," thought I, "when shall I learn it, if not now? It must be on the lips of both of them. Let it but come out into the light and I will seize it." "My dear Octave," said Brigitte, "where are we to stop? You will write to us, Henri, will you not? You will not forget my relatives and will do what you can for me?" He replied in a voice that trembled slightly that he would do all in his power to serve her. "I can answer for nothing," he said, "and judging from the letters you have received, there is not much hope. But it will not be my fault if I do not soon send you good news. Count on me, I am devoted to you." After a few more kind words, he made ready to take his departure. I arose and left the room before him. I wished to leave them together a moment for the last time, and, as soon as I had closed the door behind me, in a perfect rage of jealousy, I pressed my ear to the keyhole. "When shall I see you again?" he asked. "Never," replied Brigitte. "Adieu, Henri." She held out her hand. He bent over it, pressed it to his lips, and I had barely time to slip into a corner as he passed out without seeing me. Alone with Brigitte, my heart sank within me. She was waiting for me, her shawl on her arm, and emotion plainly marked on her face. She had found the key she had been looking for, and her desk was open. I returned and sat down near the fire. "Listen to me," I said, without daring to look at her. "I have been so culpable in my treatment of you that I ought to wait and suffer without a word of complaint. The change which has taken place in you has thrown me into such despair that I have not been able to refrain from asking you the cause. But to day I ask nothing more. Does it cost you an effort to depart? Tell me, and if so, I am resigned." Let us go," she replied. "As you please, but be frank. Whatever blow I may receive, I ought not to ask whence it comes. I should submit without a murmur, but if I lose you, do not speak to me of hope, for God knows I will not survive the loss." She turned on me like a flash. "Speak to me of your love," she said, "not of your grief." "Very well, I love you more than life. Beside my love, my grief is but a dream. Come with me to the end of the world. I will die or I will live with you." With these words I advanced toward her. She turned pale and recoiled. She made a vain effort to force a smile on her contracted lips, and sitting down before her desk, she said: "One moment, I have some papers here I want to burn." She showed me the letters from N, tore them up and threw them into the fire. She then took out other papers which she reread and then spread out on the table. They were bills of purchases she had made, and some of them were still unpaid. While examining them, she began to talk rapidly, while her cheeks burned as though with fever. Then she asked my pardon for her obstinate silence and her conduct since our arrival. She gave evidence of more tenderness, more confidence than ever. She clapped her hands gleefully at the prospect of a happy journey. In short, she was all love, or at least apparently all love. I can not tell how I suffered at the sight of that factitious joy. There was, in that grief which crazed her, something more sad than tears and more bitter than reproaches. I would have preferred to have her cold and indifferent rather than thus excited. It seemed to me a parody of our happiest moments. There were the same words, the same woman, the same caresses, and that which 15 days before would have intoxicated me with love and happiness, repeated thus, filled me with horror. "Brigitte," I suddenly inquired, "what secret are you concealing from me? If you love me, what horrible comedy is this you are playing before me?" "I," said she, almost offended, "what makes you think I am playing?" "What makes me think so? Tell me, my dear, that you have death in your soul and that you are suffering martyrdom. Behold, my arms are ready to receive you. Lean your head on me and weep. Then I will take you away, perhaps, but in truth not thus." Let us go," she again repeated. "No, on my soul, no, not at present, no, not while there is between us a lie or a mask. I like unhappiness better than such cheerfulness as yours." She was silent, astonished to see that I had not been deceived by her words and manner, and that I saw through them both. "Why should we delude ourselves?" I continued. "Have I fallen so low in your esteem that you can dissimulate before me? That unfortunate journey, you think you are condemned to it, do you? Am I a tyrant, an absolute master? Am I an executioner who drags you to punishment? How much do you fear my wrath when you come before me with such mimicry? What terror impels you to lie thus?" "You are wrong," she replied. "I beg of you not a word more." Why so little sincerity? If I am not your confidant, may I not at least be your friend? If I am denied all knowledge of the source of your tears, may I not at least see them flow? Have you not enough confidence in me to believe that I will respect your sorrow? What have I done that I should be ignorant of it? Might not the remedy lay right there? No, she replied, you are wrong. You will achieve your own unhappiness as well as mine if you press me farther. Is it not enough that we are going away? And do you expect me to drag you away against your will? Is it not evident that you have consented reluctantly and that you are already beginning to repent? Great God! What is it you are concealing from me? What is the use playing with words when your thoughts are as clear as that glass before which you stand? Would I not be the meanest of men to accept at your hands what is yielded with so much regret? And yet, how can I refuse it? What can I do if you refuse to speak? No, I do not oppose you. You are mistaken. I love you, Octave. Cease tormenting me thus. She threw so much tenderness into these words that I fell down on my knees before her. Who could resist her glance and her voice? My God, I cried, you love me, Brigitte? My dear mistress, you love me? Yes, I love you. Yes, I belong to you. Do with me what you will. I will follow you. Let us go away together. Come, Octave, the carriage is waiting. She pressed my hand in hers and kissed my forehead. Yes, it must be, she murmured. It must be. It must be, I repeated to myself. I arose. On the table there remained only one piece of paper that Brigitte was examining. She picked it up, then allowed it to drop to the floor. Is that all? I asked. Yes, that is all. When I ordered the horses, I had no idea that we could really go. I wished merely to make a trial, but circumstances bid fair to force me to carry my plans further than I at first intended. I opened the door. It must be, I said to myself. It must be, I repeated aloud. What do you mean by that, Brigitte? What is there in those words that I do not understand? Explain yourself, or I'll not go. Why must you love me? She fell on the sofa and wrung her hands in grief. Ah, unhappy man, she cried, you will never know how to love. Yes, I think you are right, but before God I know how to suffer. You must love me, must you not? Very well, then you must answer me. Were I to lose you forever, were these walls to crumble over my head, I will not leave this spot until I have solved the mystery that has been torturing me for more than a month. Speak, or I will leave you. I may be a fool who destroys his own happiness. I may be demanding something that is not for me to possess. It may be that an explanation will separate us and raise before me an insurmountable barrier, that it will render our tour, on which I have set my heart, impossible. Whatever it may cost you and me, you shall speak, or I will renounce everything. No, I will not speak. Oh, you will speak. Do you fondly imagine I am the dupe of your lies, when I see you change between morning and evening until you differ more from your natural self than does night from day? Do you think I am deceived? When you give me as a cause some letters that are not worth the trouble of reading, do you imagine that I am to be put off with the first pretext that comes to hand because you do not choose to seek another? Is your face made of plaster that it is difficult to see what is passing in your heart? What is your opinion of me? I do not deceive myself as much as you suppose, and take care lest, in default of words, your silence discloses what you so obstinately conceal. What do you imagine I am concealing? What do I imagine? You ask me that? Is it to brave me you ask such a question? Do you think to make me desperate and thus get rid of me? Yes, I admit it, offended pride is capable of driving me to extremes. If I should explain myself freely, you would have at your service all feminine hypocrisy. You hope that I will accuse you so that you can reply that such a woman as you does not stoop to justify herself. How skilfully the most guilty and treacherous of your sex contrive to use proud disdain as a shield! Your great weapon is silence. I did not learn that yesterday. You wish to be insulted, and you hold your tongue until it comes to that. Come, come, struggle against my heart. Where yours beats, you will find it. But do not struggle against my head. It is harder than iron, and it has served me as long as yours." "Poor boy," murmured Brigitte, "you do not want to go." "No, I shall not go except with my mistress, and you are not that now. I have struggled, I have suffered, I've eaten my own heart long enough. It is time for day to break. I have loved long enough in the night. Yes or no? Will you answer me?" "No." "As you please. I will wait." I sat down on the other side of the room, determined not to rise until I had learned what I wished to know. She appeared to be reflecting and walked back and forth before me. I followed her with an eager eye, while her silence gradually increased my anger. I was unwilling to have her perceive it and was undecided what to do. I opened the window. "You may drive off," I called to those below, "and I will see that you are paid. I shall not start to night." "Poor boy!" repeated Brigitte. I quietly closed the window and sat down as though I had not heard her, but I was so furious with rage that I could hardly restrain myself. That cold silence, that negative force, exasperated me to the last point. Had I been really deceived and convinced of the guilt of the woman I loved, I could not have suffered more. As I had condemned myself to remain in Paris, I reflected that I must compel Brigitte to speak at any price. In vain I tried to think of some means of forcing her to enlighten me. For such power I would have given all I possessed. What could I do or say? She sat there calm and unruffled, looking at me with sadness. I heard the sound of the horses' hoofs on the pavement as the carriage drew out of the court. I had merely to turn my hand to call them back, but it seemed to me that there was something irrevocable about their departure. I slipped the bolt on the door. Something whispered in my ear: "You are face to face with a woman who must give you life or death." While thus buried in thought, I tried to invent some expedient that would lead to the truth. I recalled one of Diderot's romances in which a woman, jealous of her lover, resorted to a novel plan for the purpose of clearing away her doubts. She told him that she no longer loved him and that she wished to leave him. The Marquis d'Arcis, the name of the lover, falls into the trap and confesses that he himself has tired of the liaison. That piece of strategy, which I had read at too early an age, had struck me as being very skilful, and the recollection of it at this moment made me smile. "Who knows," said I to myself, "if I should try this with Brigitte, she might be deceived and tell me her secret." My anger had become furious when the idea of resorting to such trickery occurred to me. Was it so difficult to make a woman speak in spite of herself? This woman was my mistress. I must be very weak if I could not gain my point. I turned over on the sofa with an air of indifference. "Very well, my dear," said I gaily, "this is not a time for confidence, then." She looked at me in astonishment. "And yet," I continued, "we must some day come to the truth. Now I believe it would be well to begin at once. That will make you confiding, and there is nothing like an understanding between friends." Doubtless my face betrayed me as I spoke these words. Brigitte did not appear to understand and kept on walking up and down. "Do you know," I resumed, "that we have been together now 6 months? The life we are leading together is not one to be laughed at. You are young, I also. If this kind of life should become distasteful to you, are you the woman to tell me of it? In truth, if it were so, I would confess it to you frankly. And why not? Is it a crime to love? If not, it is not a crime to love less or to cease to love at all. Would it be astonishing if at our age we should feel the need of a change?" She stopped me. "At our age," said she. "Are you addressing me? What comedy are you now playing yourself?" Blood mounted to my face. I seized her hand. "Sit down here," I said, "and listen to me." "What is the use? It is not you who speak." I felt ashamed of my own strategy and abandoned it. "Listen to me," I repeated, "and come, I beg of you, sit down near me. If you wish to remain silent yourself, at least hear what I have to say." "I am listening. What have you to say to me?" "If some one should say to me, 'You are a coward,' I, who am 22 years of age and have fought on the field of honor, would throw the taunt back in the teeth of my accuser. Have I not within me the consciousness of what I am? It would be necessary for me to meet my accuser on the field and play my life against his. Why? In order to prove that I am not a coward. Otherwise the world would believe it. That single word demands that reply every time it is spoken, and it matters not by whom." "It is true. What is your meaning?" "Women do not fight, but as society is constituted there is no being, of whatever sex, who ought to submit to the indignity involved in an aspersion on all his or her past life, be that life regulated as by a pendulum. Reflect, who escapes that law? There are some, I admit, but what happens? If it is a man, dishonor; if it is a woman, what? Forgiveness. Every one who lives ought to give some evidence of life, some proof of existence. There is, then, for woman as well as for man, a time when an attack must be resented. If she is brave, she rises, announces that she is present, and sits down again. A stroke of the sword is not for her. She must not only avenge herself, but she must make her own weapons. Some one suspects her. Who? An outsider? She may hold him in contempt. Her lover whom she loves? If so, it is her life that is in question, and she may not despise him. Her only recourse is silence. You are wrong. The lover who suspects her casts an aspersion on her entire life. I know it. Her plea is her tears, her past life, her devotion, and her patience. What will happen if she remains silent? Her lover will lose her by her own act, and time will justify her. Is not that your thought? Perhaps. Silence before all. Perhaps, you say. Assuredly I will lose you if you do not speak. My resolution is made. I am going away alone. But Octave. But, I cried, time will justify you. Let us put an end to it, yes or no? Yes, I hope so. You hope so? Will you answer me definitely? This is doubtless the last time you will have the opportunity. You tell me that you love me, and I believe it. I suspect you. Is it your intention to allow me to go away and rely on time to justify you? Of what do you suspect me? I do not choose to say, for I see that it would be useless. But after all, misery for misery, at your leisure, I am as well pleased. You deceive me, you love another. That is your secret and mine. Who is it? She asked. Smith. She placed her hand on her lips and turned aside. I could say no more. We were both pensive, our eyes fixed on the floor. Listen to me, she began with an effort. I have suffered much. I call to heaven to bear me witness that I would give my life for you. So long as the faintest gleam of hope remains, I am ready to suffer anything. But although I may rouse your anger in saying to you that I am a woman, I am nevertheless a woman, my friend. We can not go beyond the limits of human endurance. Beyond a certain point I will not answer for the consequences. All I can do at this moment is to get down on my knees before you and beseech you not to go away. She knelt down as she spoke. I arose. A fool that I am, I muttered bitterly. Fool to try to get the truth from a woman. He who undertakes such a task will earn naught but derision and will deserve it. Truth, only he who sorts with chambermaids knows it. Only he who steals to their pillow and listens to the unconscious utterance of a dream hears it. He alone knows it who makes a woman of himself and initiates himself into the secrets of her cult of inconstancy. But the man who asks for it openly, he who opens a loyal hand to receive that frightful alms, he will never obtain it. They are on guard with him. For reply he receives a shrug of the shoulders, and if he rouses himself in his impatience, they rise in righteous indignation like an outraged vestal, while there falls from their lips the great feminine oracle that suspicion destroys love, and they refuse to pardon an accusation which they are unable to meet. Ah, just God, how weary I am! When will all this cease? Whenever you please, said she coldly. I am as tired of it as you. At this very moment I leave you forever, and may time justify you. Time! Time! Oh, what a cold lover! Remember this adieu. Time, and thy beauty, and thy love, and thy happiness, where will they be? Is it thus, without regret, you allow me to go? Ah, the day when the jealous lover will know that he has been unjust, the day when he shall see proofs, he will understand what a heart he has wounded. Is it not so? He will bewail his shame, he will know neither joy nor sleep, he will live only in the memory of the time when he might have been happy. But on that day his proud mistress will turn pale as she sees herself avenged. She will say to herself, "If I had only done it sooner." And believe me, if she loves him, pride will not console her. I tried to be calm, but I was no longer master of myself, and I began to pace the floor as she had done. There are certain glances that resemble the clashing of drawn swords. Such glances Brigitte and I exchanged at that moment. I looked at her as the prisoner looks at the door of his dungeon. In order to break the seal on her lips and force her to speak, I would give my life and hers. "What do you mean?" she asked. "What do you wish me to tell you?" "What you have in your heart. Are you cruel enough to make me repeat it?" "And you," she cried, "are you not 100 times more cruel? Ah, fool, as you say, who would know the truth! Fool that I would be if I expected you to believe it! You would know my secret, and my secret is that I love you. Fool that I am, you will seek another. That pallor of which you are the cause, you accuse it, you question it. Like a fool, I have tried to suffer in silence, to consecrate to you my resignation. I have tried to conceal my tears. You've played the spy, and you have counted them as witnesses against me. Fool that I am! I have thought of crossing seas, of exiling myself from France with you, of dying far from all who have loved me, leaning for sole support on a heart that doubts me. Fool that I am! I thought that truth had a glance, an accent that could not be mistaken, that would be respected. Ah, when I think of it, tears choke me. Why, if it must be ever thus, induce me to take a step that will forever destroy my peace? My head is confused. I do not know where I am. She leaned on me, weeping. Fool, fool, she repeated in a heart-rending voice. And what is it you ask? She continued. What can I do to meet those suspicions that are ever born anew, that alter with your moods? I must justify myself, you say. For what? For loving, for dying, for despairing? And if I assume a forced cheerfulness, even that cheerfulness offends you. I sacrifice everything to follow you, and you have not gone a league before you look back. Always, everywhere, whatever I may do, insults and angers. Ah, dear child, if you knew what a mortal chill comes over me, what suffering I endure in seeing my simplest words thus taken up and hurled back at me with suspicion and sarcasm. By that course you deprive yourself of the only happiness there is in the world, perfect love. You kill all delicate and lofty sentiment in the hearts of those who love you. Soon you will believe in nothing except the material and the gross. Of love there will remain for you only that which is visible and can be touched with the finger. You are young, Octave, and you have still a long life before you. You will have other mistresses. Yes, as you say, pride is a little thing, and it is not to it I look for consolation. But God wills that one of your tears shall one day pay me for those which I now shed for you." She arose. "Must it be said, must you know that for 6 months I have not sought repose without repeating to myself that it was all in vain, that you would never be cured, that I have never risen in the morning without saying that another effort must be made, that after every word you have spoken I have felt that I ought to leave you, and that you have not given me a caress that I would rather die than endure? That day by day, minute by minute, hesitating between hope and fear, I have vainly tried to conquer either my love or my grief, that when I opened my heart to you, you pierced it with a mocking glance, and that when I closed it, it seemed to me I felt within it a treasure that none but you could dispense. Shall I speak of all the frailty and all the mysteries which seem puerile to those who do not respect them? Shall I tell you that when you left me in anger, I shut myself up to read your first letters, that there is a favorite waltz that I never played in vain when I felt too keenly the suffering caused by your presence? Ah, wretch that I am, how dearly all these unnumbered tears, all these follies so sweet to the feeble, are purchased! Weep now, not even this punishment, this sorrow, will avail you." I tried to interrupt her. "Allow me to continue," she said. "The time has come when I must speak. Let us see, why do you doubt me? For 6 months, in thought, in body and in soul, I have belonged to no one but you. Of what do you dare suspect me? Do you wish to set out for Switzerland? I am ready, as you see. Do you think you have a rival? Send him a letter that I will sign and you will direct. What are we doing? Where are we going? Let us decide. Are we not always together? Very well, then why would you leave me? I can not be near you and separated from you at the same moment. It is necessary to have confidence in those we love. Love is either good or bad. If good, we must believe in it; if evil, we must cure ourselves of it. All this, you see, is a game we are playing, but our hearts and our lives are the stakes, and it is horrible. Do you wish to die? That would perhaps be better. Who am I that you should doubt me?" She stopped before the glass. "Who am I?" she repeated. "Who am I? Think of it. Look at this face of mine." "Doubt thee!" she cried, addressing her own image. "Poor, pale face, thou art suspected. Poor thin cheeks, poor tired eyes, thou and thy tears are in disgrace. Very well, put an end to thy suffering. Let those kisses that have wasted thee close thy lids. Descend into the cold earth, poor trembling body that can no longer support its own weight. When thou art there, perchance thou wilt be believed. If doubt believes in death, O sorrowful spectre, on the banks of what stream wilt thou wander and groan? What fires devour thee? Thou dreamest of a long journey, and thou hast one foot in the grave. Die! God is thy witness that thou hast tried to love. Ah, what wealth of love has been awakened in thy heart! Ah, what dreams thou hast had, what poisons thou hast drunk! What evil hast thou committed that there should be placed in thy breast a fever that consumes? What fury animates that blind creature who pushes thee into the grave with his foot, while his lips speak of thee of love? What will become of thee if thou livest? Is it not time? Is it not enough? What proof canst thou give that will satisfy when thou, poor living proof, art not believed? To what torture canst thou submit that thou hast not already endured? By what torments, what sacrifices wilt thou appease insatiable love? Thou wilt be only an object of ridicule, a thing to excite laughter. Thou wilt vainly seek a deserted street to avoid the finger of scorn. Thou wilt lose all shame and even that appearance of virtue which has been so dear to thee. and the man for whom thou hast disgraced thyself will be the first to punish thee. He will reproach thee for living for him alone, for braving the world for him, and while thy own friends are whispering about thee, he will listen to assure himself that no word of pity is spoken. He will accuse thee of deceiving him if another hand even then presses thine, and if in the desert of thy life thou findest some one who can spare thee a word of pity in passing, O God, dost thou remember a day when a wreath of roses was placed on my head? Was it this brow on which that crown rested? Ah, the hand that hung it on the wall of the oratory has now fallen, like it, to dust. O my valley! O my old aunt, who now sleeps in peace! O my lindens, my little white goat, my dear peasants who love me so much! You remember when I was happy, proud and respected? Who threw in my path that stranger who took me away from all this? Who gave him the right to enter my life? Ah, wretch, why didst thou turn the first day he followed you? Why didst thou receive him as a brother? Why didst thou open thy door, and why didst thou hold out thy hand? Octave, Octave, why have you loved me if all is to end thus? She was about to faint as I led her to a chair, where she sank down and her head fell on my shoulder. The terrible effort she had made in speaking to me so bitterly had broken her down. Instead of an outraged woman, I found now only a suffering child. Her eyes closed and she was motionless. When she regained consciousness, she complained of extreme languor and begged to be left alone that she might rest. She could hardly walk. I carried her gently to her room and placed her on the bed. There was no mark of suffering on her face. She was resting from her sorrow as from great fatigue, and seemed not even to remember it. Her feeble and delicate body yielded without a struggle. The strain had been too great. She held my hand in hers. I kissed her. Our lips met in loving union, and after the cruel scene through which she had passed, she slept smiling on my heart as on the first day. End of Chapter 5, Part 5, Book 3. Recording by Don Evans. www.donmevans.com.
Chapter 6, Part 5, Book 3 of Confession of a Child of the Century. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Croudy. Confession of a Child of the Century by Alfred de MUSSET. Translated by Kendall Warren. Book 3, Part 5, Chapter 6. Brigitte slept. Silent, motionless, I sat near her. As a farmer, when a storm has passed, counts the sheaves that remain in his devastated field, thus I began to estimate the evil I had done. The more I thought of it, the more irreparable I felt it to be. Certain sorrows, by their very excess, warn us of their limits, and the more shame and remorse I experienced, the more I felt that, after such a scene, nothing remained for us to do but say adieu. Whatever courage Brigitte had shown, she had drunk to the dregs the bitter cup of her sad love. Unless I wished to see her die, I must give her repose. She had often addressed cruel reproaches to me, and had, perhaps on certain other occasions, shown more anger than in this scene. But what she had said this time was not dictated by offended pride. It was the truth which, hidden closely in her heart, had broken it in escaping. Our present relations, and the fact that I had refused to go away with her, destroyed all hope. She desired to pardon me, but she had not the power. This slumber even, this death-like sleep of one who could suffer no more, was conclusive evidence. This sudden silence, the tenderness she had shown in the final moments, that pale face and that kiss, confirmed me in the belief that all was over, and that I had broken, forever, whatever bond had united us. As surely as she slept now, as soon as I gave her cause for further suffering, she would sleep in eternal rest. The clock struck, and I felt that the last hour had carried away my life with hers. Unwilling to call anyone, I lighted Brigitte's lamp. I watched its feeble flame, and my thoughts seemed to flicker in the darkness like its uncertain rays. Whatever I had said or done, the idea of losing Brigitte had never occurred to me up to this time. 100 times I wished to leave her, but who has loved and is ready to say just what is in his heart? That was in times of despair or of anger. So long as I knew that she loved me, I was sure of loving her. Stern necessity had just arisen between us for the first time. I experienced a dull languor and could distinguish nothing clearly. What my mind understood, my soul recoiled from accepting. Come, I said to myself, I have desired it and I have done it. There is not the slightest hope that we can live together. I am unwilling to kill this woman, so I have no alternative but to leave her. It is all over. I shall go away tomorrow. And all the while I was thinking neither of my responsibility, nor of the past, nor future. I thought neither of Smith nor his connection with the affair. I could not say who had led me there, or what I had done during the last hour. I looked at the walls of the room, and thought that all I had to do was wait until tomorrow and decide what carriage I would take. I remained for a long time in this strange calm, just as the man who receives a thrust from a poignard feels at first only the cold steel. When he has gone some distance on his way, he becomes weak, his eyes start from their sockets, and he asks, "What has happened?" But drop by drop the blood flows, the ground under his feet becomes red, death comes. The man at his approach shudders with horror and falls as though struck by a thunderbolt. Thus, apparently calm, I awaited the coming of misfortune. I repeated in a low voice what Brigitte had said, and I placed near her all that I supposed she would need for the night. I looked at her and then went to the window and pressed my forehead against the pane, peering out at a sombre and lowering sky. Then I returned to the bedside. That I was going away tomorrow was the only thought in my mind, and, little by little, the word "depart" became intelligible to me. "Ah, God," I suddenly cried, "my poor mistress, I am going to lose you, and I have not known how to love you." I trembled at these words as though it had been another who had pronounced them. They resounded through all my being as resounds the string of the harp that has been plucked to the point of breaking. In an instant 2 years of suffering traversed my heart, and after them, as their consequence and as their last expression, the present seized me. How shall I describe such woe? By a single word, perhaps, for those who have loved. I had taken Brigitte's hand, and, in a dream, doubtless she had pronounced my name. I arose and went to my room. A torrent of tears flowed from my eyes. I held out my arms as though to seize the past which was escaping me. "Is it possible," I repeated, "that I am going to lose you? I can love no one but you. What? You are going away, and forever? What? You, my life, my adored mistress, you flee from me. I shall never see you again." "Never, never," I said aloud, and addressing myself to the sleeping Brigitte as though she could hear me, I added, "Never, never, do not think it. I will never consent to it. And why so much pride? Are there no means of atoning for the offence I have committed? I beg of you, let us seek some expiation. Have you not pardoned me 1,000 times? But you love me, you will not be able to go, for courage will fail you. What shall we do?" A horrible madness seized me. I began to run here and there in search of some instrument of death. At last I fell on my knees and beat my head against the bed. Brigitte stirred, and I remained quiet, fearing I would waken her. "Let her sleep until tomorrow," I said to myself. "You have all night to watch her." I resumed my place. I was so frightened at the idea of waking Brigitte that I scarcely dared breathe. Gradually I became more calm, and less bitter tears began to course gently down my cheeks. Tenderness succeeded fury. I leaned over Brigitte and looked at her as though, for the last time, my good angel was urging me to grave on my soul the lines of that dear face. How pale she was! Her large eyes, surrounded by a bluish circle, were moist with tears. Her form, once so lithe, was bent as though under a burden. Her cheek, wasted and leaden, rested on a hand that was spare and feeble. Her brow seemed to bear the marks of that crown of thorns, which is the diadem of resignation. I thought of the cottage. How young she was 6 months ago, how cheerful, how free, how careless. What had I done with all that? It seemed to me that a strange voice repeated an old romance that I had long since forgotten. Altra volta gieri biele, blanche rossa come un flore, ma ora no, non son più biele, consumatis dall'amor. My sorrow was too great. I sprang to my feet and once more began to walk the floor. Yes, I continued, look at her, think of those who are consumed by a grief that is not shared with another. The evils you endure, others have suffered, and nothing is singular or peculiar to you. Think of those who have no mother, no relatives, no friends, of those who seek and do not find, of those who love in vain, of those who die and are forgotten. Before thee, there on that bed, lies a being that nature, perchance, formed for thee. From the highest circles of intelligence to the deepest and most impenetrable mysteries of matter and of form, that soul and that body are thy brothers. For 6 months thy mouth has not spoken, thy heart has not throbbed, without a responsive word and heartbeat from her. And that woman whom God has sent thee, as he sends the rose to the field, is about to glide from thy heart. While rejoicing in each other's presence, and the angels of eternal love were singing before you, you were farther apart than 2 exiles at either end of the earth. Look at her, but be silent. Thou hast still 1 night to see her, if thy sobs do not awaken her. Little by little my thoughts mounted and became more sombre until I recoiled in terror. To do evil! Such was the role imposed upon me by Providence. I to do evil! I, to whom my conscience, even in the midst of my wildest follies, said that I was good. I, whom a pitiless destiny was dragged swiftly towards the abyss, and whom a secret horror unceasingly warned of the awful fate to come. I, who, if I had shed blood with these hands, could yet repeat that my heart was not guilty, that I was deceived, that it was not I who did it, but my destiny, my evil genius, some unknown being who dwelt within me, but who was not born there. I do evil! For 6 months I had been engaged in that task. Not a day had passed that I had not worked at that impious occupation. And I had at that moment the proof before my eyes. The man who had loved Brigitte, who had offended her, then insulted her, then abandoned her, only to take her back again, trembling with fear, beset with suspicion, finally thrown on that bed of sorrow where she now lay extended, was I. I beat my breast, and, although looking at her, I could not believe it. I touched her as though to assure myself that it was not a dream. My face, as I saw it in the glass, regarded me with astonishment. Who was that creature who appeared before me bearing my features? Who was that pitiless man who blasphemed with my mouth and tortured with my hands? Was it he whom my mother called Octave? Was it he who, at 15, leaning over the crystal waters of a fountain, had a heart not less pure than they? I closed my eyes and thought of my childhood days. As a ray of light pierces a cloud, a gleam from the past pierced my heart. No, I mused, I did not do that. These things are but an absurd dream. I recalled the time when I was ignorant of life, when I was taking my first steps in experience. I remembered an old beggar who used to sit on a stone bench before the farm gate, to whom I was sometimes sent with the remains of our morning meal. Holding out his feeble, wrinkled hands, he would bless me as he smiled upon me. I felt the morning wind blowing on my brow, and a freshness as of the rose descending from heaven into my soul. Then I opened my eyes, and, by the light of the lamp, saw the reality before me. "And you do not believe yourself guilty?" I demanded with horror. "O novice of yesterday, how corrupt today! Because you weep, you fondly imagine yourself innocent. What you consider the evidence of your conscience is only remorse, and what murderer does not experience it? If your virtue cries out, is it not because it feels the approach of death? O wretch, those far-off voices that you hear groaning in your heart, do you think they are sobs? They are, perhaps, only the cry of the sea-mew, that funereal bird of the tempest, whose presence portends shipwreck. Who has ever told the story of the childhood of those who have died stained with human blood? They also have been good in their day. They sometimes bury their faces in their hands and think of those happy days. You do evil and you repent. Nero did the same when he killed his mother. Who has told you that tears can wash away the stains of guilt? And even if it were true that a part of your soul is not devoted to evil forever, what will you do with the other part that is not yours? You will touch with your left hand the wounds that you inflict with your right. You will make a shroud of your virtue in which to bury your crimes. You will strike, and, like Brutus, you will engrave on your sword the prattle of Plato. Into the heart of the being who opens her arms to you, you will plunge that blood-stained but repentant arm. You will follow to the cemetery the victim of your passion, and you will plant on her grave the sterile flower of your pity. You will say to those who see you, "What would you expect? I have learned how to kill, and observe that I already weep. Learn that God made me better than you see me." You will speak of your youth, and you will persuade yourself that heaven ought to pardon you, that your misfortunes are involuntary, and you will implore sleepless nights to grant you a little repose. But who knows? You are still young. The more you trust in your heart, the farther astray you will be led by your pride. Today you stand before the first ruin you are going to leave on your route. If Brigitte dies tomorrow, you will weep on her tomb. Where will you go when you leave her? You will go away for 3 months perhaps, and you will travel in Italy. You will wrap your cloak about you like a splenetic Englishman, and you will say some beautiful morning, sitting in your inn with your glasses before you, that it is time to forget in order to live again. You who weep too late, take care lest you weep more than one day. Who knows? When the present which makes you shudder shall have become the past, an old story, a confused memory, may it not happen some night of debauchery that you will overturn your chair and recount, with a smile on your lips, what you witnessed with tears in your eyes? It is thus that one drinks away shame. You have begun by being good, you will become weak, and you will become a monster. My poor friend, said I from the bottom of my heart, I have a word of advice for you, and it is this. I believe that you must die. While there is still some virtue left, profit by it in order that you may not become altogether bad, while a woman you love lies there dying on that bed, and while you have a horror of yourself, strike the decisive blow. She still lives, that is enough. Do not attend her funeral obsequies for fear that on the morrow you will not be consoled. Turn the poignard against your own heart while that heart yet loves the God who made it. Is it your youth that makes you pause? And would you spare those youthful locks? Never allow them to whiten if they are not white tonight. And then what would you do in the world? If you go away, where will you go? What can you hope for if you remain? Ah, in looking at that woman you seem to have a treasure buried in your heart. It is not merely that you lose her, it is less what has been than what might have been. When the hands of the clock indicated such and such an hour, you might have been happy. If you suffer, why do you not open your heart? If you love, why do you not say so? Why do you die of hunger clasping a priceless treasure in your hands? You have closed the door, you miser. You debate with yourself behind locks and bolts. Shake them, for it was your hand that forged them. O fool, who have desired and have possessed your desire, you have not thought of God. You play with happiness as a child plays with a rattle, and you do not reflect how rare and fragile a thing you hold in your hands. You treat it with disdain, you smile at it, and you continue to amuse yourself with it, forgetting how many prayers it has cost your good angel to preserve for you that shadow of daylight. Ah, if there is in heaven one who watches over you, what is he doing at this moment? He is seated before an organ, his wings are half folded, his hands extended over the ivory keys. He begins an eternal hymn, the hymn of love and immortal rest. But his wings droop, his head falls over the keys. The angel of death has touched him on the shoulder. He disappears into immensity. And you, at the age of 22, when a noble and exalted passion, when the strength of youth might perhaps have made something of you, when after so many sorrows and bitter disappointments, a youth so dissipated, you saw a better time shining in the future, when your life, consecrated to the object of your adoration, gave promise of new strength, at that moment the abyss yawns before you. You no longer experience vague desires, but real regrets. Your heart is no longer hungry, it is broken. And you hesitate? What do you expect? Since she no longer cares for your life, it counts for nothing. Since she abandons you, abandon yourself. Let those who have loved you in your youth weep for you. They are not many. If you would live, you must not only forget love, but you must deny that it exists. Not only deny what there has been of good in you, but kill all that may be good in the future. For what will you do if you remember? Life for you would be one ceaseless regret. No, you must choose between your soul and your body. You must kill one or the other. The memory of the good drives you to the evil. Make a corpse of yourself unless you wish to become your own spectre. O child, die while you can. May tears be shed over thy grave. I threw myself on the foot of the bed in such a frightful state of despair that my reason fled, and I no longer knew where I was or what I was doing. Brigitte sighed. My senses stirred within me. Was it grief or despair? I do not know. Suddenly a horrible idea occurred to me. What, I muttered, leave that for another. Die, descend into the ground while that bosom heaves with the air of heaven. Just God, another hand than mine on that fine transparent skin, another mouth on those lips, another love in that heart. Brigitte happy, loving, adored, and I in a corner of the cemetery crumbling into dust in a ditch. How long will it take her to forget me if I cease to exist tomorrow? How many tears will she shed? None, perhaps. Not a friend who speaks to her but will say that my death was a good thing. Who will not hasten to console her? Who will not urge her to forget me? If she weeps, they will seek to distract her attention from her loss. If memory haunts her, they will take her away. If her love for me survives me, they will seek to cure her as though she had been poisoned. And she herself, who will perhaps at first say that she desires to follow me, will a month later turn aside to avoid the weeping willow planted over my grave. How could it be otherwise? Who as beautiful as she wastes life in idle regrets? If she should think of dying of grief, that beautiful bosom would urge her to live, and her glass would persuade her, and the day when her exhausted tears give place to the first smile, who will not congratulate her on her recovery? When after 8 days of silence she consents to hear my name pronounced in her presence, then she will speak of it herself as though to say, "Console me." Then, little by little, she will no longer refuse to think of the past, but will speak of it, and she will open her window some beautiful spring morning when the birds are singing in the garden. She will become pensive and say, "I have loved." Who will be there at her side? Who will dare to tell her that she must continue to love? Ah, then I will be no more. You will listen to him, faithless one. You will blush as does the budding rose, and the blood of youth will mount to your face. While saying that your heart is sealed, you will allow it to escape through that fresh aureole of beauty, each ray of which allures a kiss. How much they desire to be loved who say they love no more. And why should that astonish you? You are a woman, that body, that spotless bosom, you know what they are worth. When you conceal them under your dress, do you not believe, as do the virgins, that they are all alike, and you know the price of your modesty? How can the woman who has been praised resolve to be praised no more? Does she think she is living when she remains in the shadow, and there is silence round about her beauty? Her beauty itself is the admiring glance of her lover. No, there can be no doubt of it. Who has loved cannot live without love. Who has seen death clings to life. Brigitte loves me and will perhaps die of love. I will kill myself and another will have her. Another, I repeated, bending over her until my head touched her shoulder. Is she not a widow? Has she not already seen death? Have not these little hands prepared the dead for burial? Her tears for the second will not flow as long as those shed for the first. Ah, God forgive me, while she sleeps, why should I not kill her? If I should awaken her now and tell her that her hour had come, and that we were going to die with a last kiss, she would consent. What does it matter? Is it certain that all does not end with that? I found a knife on the table, and I picked it up. Fear, cowardice, superstition, what do they know about it who talk of something else beyond? It is for the ignorant, common people that a future life has been invented. But who really believes in it? What watcher in the cemetery has seen death leave his tomb and hold consultation with a priest? In olden times there were phantoms. They are interdicted by the police in civilized cities, and no cries are now heard issuing from the earth except from those buried in haste. Who has silenced death, if it has ever spoken? Because funeral processions are no longer permitted to encumber our streets, does the celestial spirit languish? To die, that is the final purpose, the end. God has established it, man discusses it, but over every door is written, "Do what thou wilt, thou shalt die." What will be said if I kill Brigitte? Neither of us will hear. In tomorrow's journal would appear the intelligence that Octave the T had killed his mistress, and the day after no one would speak of it. Who would follow us to the grave? No one who, upon returning to his home, could not enjoy a hearty dinner, and when we were extended side by side in our narrow bed, the world could walk over our graves without disturbing us. Is it not true, my well-beloved, is it not true that it would be well with us? It is a soft bed, that bed of earth. No suffering can reach us there. The occupants of the neighbouring tombs will not gossip about us. Our bones will embrace in peace and without pride, for death is solace, and that which binds does not also separate. Why should annihilation frighten thee, poor body destined to corruption? Every hour that strikes drags thee on to thy doom. Every step breaks the round on which thou hast just rested. Thou art nourished by the dead. The air of heaven weighs upon and crushes thee. The earth on which thou treadest attacks thee by the soles of thy feet. Down with thee! Why art thou affrighted? Thou dost tremble at a word. Merely say, "We will not live." Is not life a burden that we long to lay down? Why hesitate when it is merely a question of a little sooner or a little later? Matter is indestructible, and the physicists, we are told, grind to infinity the smallest speck of dust without being able to annihilate it. If matter is the property of chance, what harm can it do to change its form, since it cannot cease to be matter? Why should God care what form I have received and with what livery I invest my grief? Suffering lives in my brain, it belongs to me, I kill it, but my bones do not belong to me, and I return them to him who lent them to me. May some poet make a cup of my skull from which to drink his new wine. What reproach can I incur, and what harm can that reproach do me? What stern judge will tell me that I have done wrong? What does he know about it? Was he such as I? If every creature has his task to perform, and if it is a crime to shirk it, what culprits are the babes who die on the nurse's breast? Why should they be spared? Who will be instructed by the lessons which are taught after death? Must heaven be a desert in order that man may be punished for having lived? Is it not enough to have lived? I do not know who asked that question unless it was Voltaire on his deathbed. It is a cry of despair worthy of a helpless old atheist. But to what purpose? Why so many struggles? Who is there above us who delights in so much agony? Who amuses himself and whiles away an idle hour watching this spectacle of creation, always renewed and always dying, seeing the work of man's hands rising, the grass growing, looking upon the planting of the seed and the fall of the thunderbolt, beholding man walking about upon his earth until he meets the beckoning finger of death, counting tears and watching them dry upon the cheek of pain, noting the pure profile of love and the wrinkled face of age, seeing hands stretch up to him in supplication, bodies prostrate before him, and not a blade of wheat more in the harvest. Who is it then who has made so much for the pleasure of knowing that it all amounts to nothing? The earth is dying. Herschel says it is of cold. Who holds in his hand a drop of condensed vapour and watches it as it dries up, as an angler watches a grain of sand in his hand? That mighty law of attraction that suspends the world in space torments it and consumes it in endless desire. Every planet carries its load of misery and groans on its axle. They call to each other across the abyss, and each wonders which will stop first. God controls them. They accomplish assiduously and eternally their appointed and useless task. They whirl about, they suffer, they burn, they become extinct, and they light up with new flame. They descend and they reascend, they follow and yet they avoid each other, they interlace like rings, they carry on their surface thousands of beings who are ceaselessly renewed. The beings move about, cross each other's paths, clasp each other for an hour, and then fall, and others rise in their place. Where life fails, life hastens to the spot. Where air is wanting, air rushes. No disorder, everything is regulated, marked out, written down in lines of gold and parables of fire. Everything keeps step with the celestial music along the pitiless paths of life, and all for nothing. And we, poor nameless dreams, pale and sorrowful apparitions, helpless ephemera, we who are animated by the breath of a second in order that death may exist, we exhaust ourselves with fatigue in order to prove that we are living for a purpose and that something indefinable is stirring within us. We hesitate to turn against our breasts a little piece of steel or blow out our brains with a little instrument no larger than our hand. It seems to us that chaos would return again. We have written and revised the laws, both human and divine, and we are afraid of our catechisms. We suffer 30 years without murmuring and imagine that we are struggling. Finally, suffering becomes the stronger. We send a pinch of powder into the sanctuary of intelligence, and a flower pierces the soil above our grave. As I finished these words, I directed the knife I held in my hand against Brigitte's bosom. I was no longer master of myself, and in my delirious condition I know not what might have happened. I threw back the bedclothing to uncover the heart, when I discovered on her white bosom a little ebony crucifix. I recoiled, seized with sudden fear. My hand relaxed, my weapon fell to the floor. It was Brigitte's aunt who had given her that little crucifix on her deathbed. I did not remember ever having seen it before. Doubtless at the moment of setting out she had suspended it about her neck as a preserving charm against the dangers of the journey. Suddenly I joined my hands and knelt on the floor. "O Lord my God," I said in trembling tones, "Lord my God, thou art there." Let those who do not believe in Christ read this page. I no longer disbelieved in him. Neither as a child, nor at school, nor as a man have I frequented churches. My religion, if I had any, had neither rite nor symbol, and I believe in a God without form, without a cult, and without revelation. Poisoned from youth by all the writings of the last century, I had sucked at an early hour the sterile milk of impiety. Human pride, that god of the egoist, closed my mouth against prayer while my affrighted soul took refuge in the hope of nothingness. I was as though drunken or insensate when I saw that effigy of Christ on Brigitte's bosom. While not believing in him myself, I recoiled, knowing that she believed in him. It was not vain terror that arrested my hand. Who saw me? I was alone, and it was night. Was it prejudice? What prevented me from hurling out of my sight that little piece of black wood? I could have thrown it into the fire, but it was my weapon I threw there. Ah, what an experience that was, and still is, for my soul! What miserable wretches are men who mock at that which can save a human being! What matters the name, the form, the belief? Is not all that is good sacred? How dare anyone touch God? As, at a glance from the sun, the snows descend the mountains, and the glaciers that threatened heaven melt into streams in the valley, so there descended into my heart a stream that overflowed its banks. Repentance is a pure incense. It exhaled from all my suffering. Although I had almost committed a crime when my hand was arrested, I felt that my heart was innocent. In an instant, calm self-possession, reason returned. I again approached the bed. I leaned over my idol and kissed the crucifix. "Sleep in peace," I said to her. "God watches over you. While your lips were parting in a smile, you were in greater danger than you have ever known before. But the hand that threatened you will harm no one. I swear by the faith you profess, I will not kill either you or myself. I am a fool, a madman, a child who thinks himself a man. God be praised. You are young and beautiful. You live and you will forget me. You will recover from the evil I have done you, if you can forgive me. Sleep in peace until day, Brigitte, and then decide our fate. Whatever sentence you pronounce, I will submit without complaint. And thou, Lord, who hast saved me, grant me pardon. I was born in an impious century, and I have many crimes to expiate. Thou Son of God, whom men forget, I have not been taught to love thee. I have never worshipped in thy temples, but I thank heaven that where I find thee, I tremble and bow in reverence. I have at least kissed with my lips a heart that is full of thee. Protect that heart so long as life lasts. Dwell within it, thou Holy One. A poor unfortunate has been brave enough to defy death at the sight of thy suffering and thy death. Though impious, thou hast saved him from evil. If he had believed, thou wouldst have consoled him. Pardon those who have made him incredulous, since thou hast made him repentant. Pardon those who blaspheme. When they were in despair, they did not see thee. Human joys are a mockery, they are scornful and pitiless. O Lord, the happy of this world think they have no need of thee. Pardon them. Although their pride may outrage thee, they will be, sooner or later, baptized in tears. Grant that they may cease to believe in any other shelter from the tempest than thy love, and spare them the severe lessons of unhappiness. Our wisdom and scepticism are in our hands but children's toys. Forgive us for dreaming that we can defy thee, thou who smilest at Golgotha. The worst result of all our vain misery is that it tempts us to forget thee, but thou knowest that it is all but a shadow which a glance from thee can dissipate. Hast not thou thyself been a man? It was sorrow that made thee God. Sorrow is an instrument of torture by which thou hast mounted to the very throne of God, thy Father, and it is sorrow that leads us to thee as it led thee to thy Father. We come to thee with our crown of thorns and kneel before thy mercy seat. We touch thy bleeding feet with our blood-stained hands, and thou hast suffered martyrdom for being loved by the unfortunate. The first rays of dawn began to appear. Man and nature were rousing themselves from sleep, and the air was filled with the confusion of distant sounds. Weak and exhausted, I was about to leave Brigitte and seek a little repose. As I was passing out of the room, a dress thrown on a chair slipped to the floor near me, and in its folds I spied a piece of paper. I picked it up. It was a letter, and I recognized Brigitte's hand. The envelope was not sealed. I opened it and read as follows. 23rd of December, 1800. When you receive this letter, I shall be far away from you, and shall perhaps never see you again. My destiny is bound up with that of a man for whom I have sacrificed everything. He cannot live without me, and I am going to try to die for him. I love you, adieu, and pity us. I turned the letter over when I had read it, and saw that it was addressed to Monsieur Henri Smith, N., Poste Restante. End of Chapter 6, Part 5, Book 3. Recording by John Croudy, Turku, Finland. Chapter 7, Part 5, Book 3 of Confession of a Child of the Century. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Croudy. Confession of a Child of the Century by Alfred de MUSSET. Translated by Kendall Warren. Book 3, Part 5, Chapter 7. On the morrow, a clear December day, a young man and a woman who rested on his arm passed through the garden of the Palais Royal. They entered a jeweller's store where they chose 2 similar rings, which they smilingly exchanged. After a short walk they took breakfast at the Frères Provençaux, in one of those little rooms which are, all things considered, one of the most beautiful spots in the world. There, when the garçon had left them, they sat near the windows, hand in hand. The young man was in travelling dress. To see the joy which shone on his face, one would have taken him for a young husband showing his young wife the beauties and pleasures of Parisian life. His happiness was calm and subdued, as true happiness always is. The experienced would have recognized in him the youth who merges into manhood. From time to time he looked up at the sky, then at his companion, and tears glittered in his eyes, but he heeded them not and smiled as he wept. The woman was pale and thoughtful. Her eyes were fixed on the man. On her face were traces of sorrow which she could not conceal, although evidently touched by the exalted joy of her companion. When he smiled, she smiled too, but never alone. When he spoke, she replied, and she ate what he served her, but there was about her a silence which was only broken at his instance. In her languor could be clearly distinguished that gentleness of soul, that lethargy of the weaker of 2 beings who love, one of whom exists only in the other, and responds to him as does the echo. The young man was conscious of it, and seemed proud of it and grateful for it, but it could be seen even by his pride that his happiness was new to him. When the woman became sad and her eyes fell, he cheered her with his glance, but he could not always succeed, and seemed troubled himself. That mingling of strength and weakness, of joy and sorrow, of anxiety and serenity, could not have been understood by an indifferent spectator. At times they appeared the most happy of living creatures, and the next moment the most unhappy, but although ignorant of their secret, one would have felt that they were suffering together, and, whatever their mysterious trouble, it could be seen that they had placed on their sorrow a seal more powerful than love itself — friendship. While their hands were clasped, their glances were chaste. Although they were alone, they spoke in low tones. As though overcome by their feelings, they sat face to face, although their lips did not touch. They looked at each other tenderly and solemnly. When the clock struck 1, the woman heaved a sigh and said, "Octave, are you sure of yourself?" "Yes, my friend, I am resolved. I will suffer much, a long time, perhaps forever, but we will cure ourselves, you with time, I with God." "Octave, Octave," repeated the woman, "are you sure you are not deceiving yourself?" "I do not believe we can forget each other, but I believe that we can forgive, and that is what I desire, even at the price of separation." "Why could we not meet again? Why not some day? You are so young." Then she added with a smile, "We could see each other without danger." "No, my friend, for you must know that I could never see you again without loving you. May he to whom I bequeath you be worthy of you. Smith is brave, good and honest, but however much you may love him, you see very well that you still love me, for if I should decide to remain, or to take you away with me, you would consent." "It is true," replied the woman. "True, true," repeated the young man, looking into her eyes with all his soul. "Is it true that if I wished it you would go with me?" Then he continued softly, "That is the reason I must never see you again. There are certain loves in life that overturn the head, the senses, the mind, the heart. There is among them all but one that does not disturb, that penetrates, and that dies only with the being in which it has taken root." "But you will write to me?" "Yes, at first, for what I have to suffer is so keen that the absence of the habitual object of my love would kill me. When I was unknown to you, I gradually approached closer and closer to you until— But let us not go into the past. Little by little my letters will become less frequent until they cease altogether. I will thus descend the hill that I have been climbing for the past year. When one stands before a fresh grave over which are engraved 2 cherished names, one experiences a mysterious sense of grief, which causes tears to trickle down one's cheeks. It is thus that I wish to remember having once lived." At these words the woman threw herself on the couch and burst into tears. The young man wept with her, but he did not move, and seemed anxious to appear unconscious of her emotion. When her tears ceased to flow, he approached her, took her hand in his, and kissed it. "Believe me," he said, "to be loved by you, whatever the name of the place I occupy in your heart, will give me strength and courage. Rest assured, Brigitte, no one will ever understand you better than I. Another will love you more worthily. No one will love you more truly. Another will be considerate of those feelings that I offend. He will surround you with his love. You will have a better lover. You will not have a better brother. Give me your hand and let the world laugh at a word that it does not understand. Let us be friends and adieu forever. Before we became such intimate friends, there was something within that told us that we were destined to mingle our lives. Let that part of us which is still joined in God's sight never know that we have parted upon earth. Let not the paltry chance of a moment undo the union of our eternal happiness." He held the woman's hand. She arose, tears streaming from her eyes, and, stepping up to the mirror with a strange smile on her face, she cut from her head a long tress of hair. Then she looked at herself, thus disfigured and deprived of a part of her beautiful crown, and gave it to her lover. The clock struck again. It was time to go. When they passed out, they seemed as joyful as when they entered. "What a glorious sun," said the young man. "And a beautiful day," said Brigitte, "the memory of which shall never fade." They hastened away and disappeared in the crowd. A moment later a carriage passed over a little hill beyond Fontainebleau. The young man was the only occupant. He looked for the last time upon his native town as it disappeared in the distance, and thanked God that, of the 3 beings who had suffered through his fault, there remained but one of them still unhappy. End of Chapter 7, Part 5, Book 3. Recording by John Croudy, Turku, Finland. End of Part 5. End of Book 3. End of Confession of a Child of the Century by Alfred de MUSSET. Translated by Kendall Warren.